Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever experienced something so strange, so unnerving, that it made you question your own sanity? That's how it started for me on a quiet, uneventful night in my apartment. At first, I thought I was just imagining things. But night after night, I saw the same thing. A hand that would appear at my window, seemingly out of nowhere, even though I was living on the 12th floor of a building that stood far above the streets below. I live alone, which might explain the paranoia that crept up on me when I first saw it. I thought maybe I'd just seen something from the corner of my eye, nothing more than a trick of the light. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, I would turn off the lights, sit in the darkness of my living room, staring at the window with growing dread. At first, I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. But no matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, the hand was always there. It would press against the glass, long fingers stretching as if trying to reach me. I could hear the faint scrape of the nails against the window as it lingered. Then, after a few moments, it would disappear, as if the hand had never been there at all. I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. Maybe a bird had perched on the window, or some other explanation that I could come up with to dismiss the dread gnawing at me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The hand was too real. Too deliberate. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. I remember the first time I tried to catch it. I waited until it was late, the city below silent, my apartment dimly lit by the glow of the streetlights. I was certain this time I was going to see what it was, who it was, on the other side of the window. But when I stood there, staring out into the night, I didn't see anything. No hand. No shadow. Just the empty night stretching out below. I was relieved, at first. But then, I saw it. A faint movement in the corner of my vision. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the fingers appeared again. They pressed against the glass, and for the briefest moment, I could almost hear the sound of breathing. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, and I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process what I was seeing. The hand was closer now, closer than before. And then, the fingers curled, as if beckoning me. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I was rooted to the spot, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. There was something familiar about it. Something I couldn't place, something that unsettled me to my core. The hand stayed there for a long time. I don't know how long. It felt like hours. It never moved. It never left. It just stayed there, pressing against the glass, its fingers slowly curling and uncurling, like it was waiting for me to do something. Waiting for me to respond. I couldn't move. My body refused to cooperate. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, to get as far away from that window as I could, but my legs wouldn't listen. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand was gone. I thought about it all night, lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew, deep down, that I was lying to myself. The hand would be back. And next time, it wouldn't be content with just appearing outside my window. It was searching for something. Something or someone. And it was getting closer. The following night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to me. It felt like the shadows in my apartment had grown deeper, darker. Even the soft hum of the city below seemed muffled, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I couldn't get rid of the image of that hand pressing against the glass. Its fingers had looked so real, so deliberate, like they knew exactly what they were doing. I tried to brush it off. After all, it was just a hand, right? A figment of my imagination, perhaps. Something my mind had created out of stress and the quiet isolation of my apartment. But I knew better. The next evening, I prepared myself. This time, I wouldn't let the fear paralyze me. I would face whatever it was, whatever this thing was that had begun to haunt my window. I sat by the window, my eyes fixed on the night outside. I waited in silence, barely breathing, hoping for the hand to return. The room felt cold now, the familiar walls around me seeming more like a cage than a safe space. Then, just as I had feared, it appeared again. The fingers pressed against the glass with a soft, almost mournful sound, as if it had waited for me to be ready. My heart raced in my chest, but this time I forced myself to stand. I walked closer to the window, my breath catching in my throat. The hand was different this time. It wasn't just there, hanging limply against the glass. It moved. Slowly, methodically, it began to trace shapes on the window, forming patterns that didn't make sense. Curves, loops, sharp angles, all swirling together in a pattern that was somehow familiar, but not at the same time. I could feel my skin prickling, my pulse hammering in my ears. The hand seemed to be trying to communicate, as if it were writing something, though it left no marks on the glass. It was as if the air itself had shifted in response to its touch. I moved closer, pressing my face against the glass, my breath fogging it up as I stared. The patterns continued, growing more intricate with every passing second. I couldn't look away. The hand, as if sensing my fixation, lingered longer, as if waiting for something. I was about to turn away when I saw it, my name. The letters formed slowly, one by one, as if the hand had some invisible ink to write with. Evan. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. No one knew my name here, not in this building. I'd only moved in a few months ago, keeping to myself, not bothering anyone. But there it was, clear as day, on the window, Evan. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor. I couldn't process what I was seeing. The hand had written my name, and I didn't know how to respond, how to make sense of this horror that seemed so personal. The hand remained there for a moment longer, its fingers twitching as if it had done its part, then slowly withdrew. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, my fingers trembling as I tried to make sense of the situation. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but who would believe me? Who could possibly understand? The air felt thick around me. It was like the room had grown smaller, closing in, suffocating me. The hand was no longer a mere oddity, it had crossed a line. It knew me. It knew my name. And that was just the beginning. As the night wore on, I didn't dare sleep. I couldn't. The fear had taken root deep inside me, gnawing at my thoughts, forcing me to stay awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the hand in my mind, its fingers splayed out against the window, waiting. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only going to escalate. But what choice did I have? There was no escaping it, no hiding from it. I would have to face whatever this thing was, whatever had decided to come for me. and I would have to do it alone. The next few nights were a blur. The hand came every night, just as it had before, but now there was something different in its movements. It wasn't just pressing against the window anymore. Now it would linger, tapping lightly on the glass, as though it were trying to get my attention. Sometimes it would just hover, barely a few inches from the surface, and I could almost feel the weight of its presence on the other side. Every time I thought it would leave, it didn't. It stayed, as if waiting for something. It started to feel like it was watching me, learning me, and I couldn't escape it. I had tried everything, closing the blinds, moving to another room, even trying to stay awake all night. But nothing worked. No matter what I did, the hand always found its way back to the window. I began to wonder if it was the building itself. Was there something here, something about the space I lived in that attracted it? But that didn't explain how it knew me, how it knew my name. Each night the hand grew bolder. I could sense it before I saw it, like a cold breath on the back of my neck. It wasn't irrational fear anymore, it was primal, something deep inside me telling me that this was not a game. This was not something I could explain away. And the worst part was, it wanted something from me. It was becoming clear. The hand wasn't just a sign, it wasn't just some strange event. It was a message. Every night, the hand would leave traces, patterns, scratches, symbols. Some of them I recognized, and some I didn't. One night, the hand didn't write anything at all. It simply pressed flat against the glass, its fingers splayed wide, and then it began to move. I swear I saw the outline of a face, just barely visible in the reflection of the window. A face that didn't belong. I jumped back, heart pounding. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in, and I could no longer tell where the air had gone. The hand, now fully visible, was there in front of me, just on the other side of the glass, and I could feel its coldness even through the window. It was as if I could feel the intention behind it, dark, desperate, urgent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then it happened. A knock. A single, sharp rap against the window, as though the hand was saying enough. I rushed to the door, heart hammering in my chest. I needed to leave. I had to leave. The building felt cursed now, as if the walls were closing in on me. The very foundation beneath my feet was shifting, bending. I couldn't understand it. Why was this happening? And why me? But before I could even reach for the door handle, the window pane shattered. Not violently. No, it was like the glass simply collapsed, the shards falling in slow motion around me. The hand was still there, hovering, its fingers reaching toward me as if it had crossed an invisible threshold. My heart froze in place. I stumbled back, falling to the floor, my head spinning. I couldn't move. There was no way out. The hand reached for me, its fingers curling, beckoning me toward it. And I could feel myself moving forward, as if some force beyond my control was pulling me toward it. I couldn't stop myself. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went still. The hand was gone. The room was silent. But the damage had been done. I couldn't explain what had happened. My heart was still racing, my body frozen in fear, but the hand had left me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Something had changed. I knew that. And it wasn't over. The hand would be back, and it wouldn't stop until it had me. The days blurred together. I couldn't tell if it was the exhaustion or the dread that had seeped into my bones, but time seemed to stretch in ways it never had before. I tried to return to some sense of normalcy, but it felt impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my vision, made my heart race. The hand, and whatever it was, had taken root in my mind. Sleep had become an impossible luxury. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if tonight would be the night it came again. The silence in the apartment was oppressive. The walls seemed to hum with an eerie anticipation, and the space I once felt safe in now felt like a trap. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. But where could I go? The hand had followed me into every corner of my life. There was nowhere I could hide that it wouldn't find me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, that cold, spectral presence at the window, waiting for me. I had started researching, trying to understand what was happening to me. I found nothing that made sense, no logical explanation for what I was experiencing. No accounts of anything like this, at least none that seemed close enough. Every theory I found seemed far-fetched, like stories made to scare children. But there was no comfort in those theories. I had learned the hard way that whatever this was, it didn't belong in any of those stories. One night, I sat by the window, staring out at the dark city below. The lights of distant buildings flickered, and the hum of the city was distant, almost dreamlike. I felt, for a moment, like I was the only person in the world. And then I saw it. The hand. It was back. This time, it wasn't just hovering near the window, it was pressed flat against the glass, its fingers reaching upward as if trying to climb toward me. I could see the outline of something moving within it, something wrong. There was no reflection in the glass anymore, no sense of the outside world. The window had become a portal to something darker, something that had been waiting for me. I didn't want to move. I wanted to stay frozen, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't. Something inside me was screaming, urging me to act before it was too late. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a lamp, and slammed it against the window. The glass didn't shatter this time. Instead, it absorbed the impact, as if it were part of the darkness that lay just beyond the glass. The hand didn't recoil. It didn't flinch. It simply pressed harder against the glass, as though it was trying to push through, to reach me. I ran to the door. My mind was a whirlwind of panic, adrenaline rushing through my veins. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Ow! I had locked it myself. The hand outside the window twisted, its fingers bending in unnatural ways. It moved faster now, tapping against the glass with a rhythm I couldn't ignore. It was as though it was calling me. I could feel the air around me growing colder, the room suffocating with an energy I couldn't explain. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady myself, trying to think. But my mind was clouded with fear. Then, I heard it. A voice, faint at first, but unmistakable. The words were soft, as though whispered from the other side of a thin veil. Come to me. I froze. The voice wasn't just in my ears. It was inside my mind. I could feel it wrapping around my thoughts, drawing me in. The hand outside seemed to pulse with life, its fingers curling and uncurling as if it were searching for something. For me. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. The apartment was no longer safe. I forced myself to act. I ran to the window, yanking the blinds open and scrambling to unhook the latch. I had to escape. But as I lifted the window, something cold gripped my wrist. The hand had crossed the threshold. I gasped, my entire body seizing in terror. I tried to pull away, but it was too strong. The fingers wrapped around my wrist, pulling me closer, dragging me toward the window, toward that unnatural, suffocating presence. "Don't fight me," the voice whispered again, closer this time. And then, everything went dark. The last thing I remembered before I blacked out was the sensation of falling into something cold and endless. And then, silence. I woke up in my bed. The apartment was quiet. The hand was gone. But the feeling had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I could hear it. It was inside me now. And it would never leave. The apartment had never felt more empty, more cold. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. The darkness that had followed me for so long had changed form. It was now in my mind, in my every thought, a constant reminder of what had happened. I knew the hand was out there somewhere, still watching, still waiting. And the worst part? It would never let me go. Every night, I would hear the tapping at the window, faint at first, but it grew louder, more desperate. It wasn't just the hand anymore. It was something more. Something worse. The voice would come again, not in whispers, but in full sentences. "Come, join me." And every time it spoke, I could feel it inside me, like a cold hand gripping my heart, squeezing it until I couldn't breathe. I had tried to leave. I had tried to escape the apartment, the city, but it followed me. The hand was never far behind. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how far I ran, no matter how many doors I locked, it would always find me. It had already found me. And it would never let me go. I was no longer just a victim of the hand. I was its chosen one. It has been following me, inside my thoughts, my very soul. I try to push it away, try to force myself to ignore it, but it always creeps back. It's in the corners of my mind, in the shadows of my every moment. No matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can't escape the feeling that it's there, watching me. The tapping on the window has become a constant now. It's no longer just at night, it's there during the day too. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I'd find myself staring at the window, my heart racing, waiting for the inevitable. The fingers would press against the glass. One by one, they would curl, reaching, seeking. But now I understand. The hand doesn't just want me to look at it. It wants me to acknowledge it, to accept it. And every time I refuse, every time I try to deny it, the grip grows tighter. It's pulling me closer, bit by bit, until there will be no escape. I've stopped sleeping. I can't. The moment my eyes close, I feel it coming. That cold, suffocating presence. It presses against me from all sides, as though it's already inside my head. My body is exhausted, but my mind is wide awake, always alert, always waiting for the moment when it will arrive. And then, last night, it finally happened. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The voice, the feeling, it was too much. I heard the tapping again, but this time it didn't come from the window. It came from inside the apartment. It was a soft knock. Just one. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was unmistakable. The hand had moved beyond the window. It was in my apartment now. It was in the very air I breathed. I didn't know where to run. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, paralyzed, as the knock echoed through the room. Another, then another, and then it spoke. "Come, join me." This time, the voice wasn't just a whisper in my mind. It was real. It was in the room with me. It surrounded me. I could feel the cold air thickening, like something was pressing down on me. I could almost see the fingers of the hand reaching out from the darkness, moving toward me, beckoning me closer. For the first time, I felt the true horror of it all. It wasn't just a hand. It wasn't just an entity haunting my window. It was something worse. It had been waiting for me to acknowledge it, waiting for me to reach out. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. It was too late. There was nowhere left to hide. I felt my body move against my will, my feet dragging me toward the window. The hand was there. It was waiting, beckoning me closer. As I reached out, my fingers brushing against the glass, I felt the cold grip of its presence, tightening, pulling me in. And then, I stepped through. The world around me twisted and bent. I could no longer feel the floor beneath me, the air around me, the walls that once held me safe. Everything was cold, suffocating, and I could hear the voice again, louder now, louder than ever before. "You're mine now." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't move. I was suspended in nothingness, trapped in the grasp of the hand that had been following me all this time. And then, the darkness consumed me. I am no longer here. I am not in my apartment. I am not in the world I once knew. But the hand is still here. I can feel it. It has taken me, and I am nothing now but a part of it, part of the endless void that has claimed me. And so, the cycle continues. The hand will find its next victim, just as it found me. And it will never stop reaching. I still remember the first night I spent in that house. I just moved in, the boxes still half packed, my belongings scattered around the unfamiliar rooms. The house was old, too old, perhaps. The floorboards creaked beneath every step, and the walls seemed to sigh as if they were alive, breathing with the weight of years. But what truly unsettled me that night, what I couldn't shake off, was the faint sound I first thought I imagined, a whisper. At first, it was nothing more than the usual sounds of an old house settling. The wind howling outside, the shift of timbers, the occasional groan of the foundation. But this was different. It was as though someone, or something, was speaking through the walls. Soft, barely audible words that seemed to call out just beyond reach. My heart skipped a beat when I heard it again. I stood frozen, listening, straining to understand. I convinced myself it was the house settling, maybe the pipes or the wood expanding and contracting with the cold. It was an old place, after all. I'd read that old houses had a way of making sounds that could play tricks on your mind. But then, as I was unpacking a box in the living room, I heard it again, clearer this time. "Come closer." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze, my hand still gripping the corner of the box. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to laugh at myself for being so jumpy. But something about it didn't feel right. I took a deep breath and moved cautiously toward the wall, my ears straining for the next sound. There was nothing. Only silence. I spent the rest of the evening trying to ignore it, putting it down to the house's age or my tiredness. But as I lay in bed later that night, the whispers returned, softer this time, almost like a hum against the walls. I lay motionless, staring at the ceiling, the dark shadows cast by the flickering light from the street outside playing tricks on my eyes. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. "Come closer." This time, it was unmistakable. My own name whispered in the dark. Daniel. I shot up, my heart pounding. I was alone in the house. I knew that for certain. The only sounds in the room were the steady tick of the old clock on the wall and the slow, rhythmic creak of the floorboards above me. But there was no mistaking it. That voice, it was calling me. I couldn't explain it. My rational mind screamed that it was nothing more than the house, the wind, my imagination running wild. But deep down, a cold shiver crawled up my spine. There was something in that whisper, something familiar, something that I couldn't place. I knew then that I wasn't alone. The next few days were uneventful, but the whispers didn't stop. They became a constant presence, a soft murmur just below the surface of my awareness. Sometimes, I would hear them while I was in the kitchen, the sound creeping from behind the walls, curling around the corners of the room. Other times, it would come in the middle of the night, like a soft voice whispering my name, as though trying to draw me in. I began to feel the house closing in around me. It wasn't just the sounds that unnerved me. It was the feeling, the oppressive weight of it all. The feeling that I was being watched, that the walls themselves were alive, watching my every move, waiting for something. It was when I started hearing the whispers during the day, while I was wide awake, that I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I hearing things? Was this some kind of psychological breakdown? Or was something more sinister at work? One night, after a particularly long day of unpacking, I was sitting in the living room, a book open in my lap. The house was quiet, too quiet. No creaking floorboards, no wind howling outside. Just the steady hum of silence. But then, from the corner of the room, a soft voice broke through the quiet. "Daniel." I froze, the book slipping from my hands. It came from behind the wall again, but this time it was different. This time, the voice was clear, unmistakable, as if it were standing right next to me. I tried to shake it off, but the words had already sent a chill down my spine. "Come closer." I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. I approached the wall, my hand pressed against it as if I could somehow feel the voice, as if I could understand it. The room seemed to grow colder with every passing second, and my breath came in shallow gasps. "Who's there?" I whispered into the empty room, my voice sounding small and weak. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the whisper returned. It was softer now, like a breath against my ear. "Come closer, Daniel." I stepped back, heart racing. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was alive, holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I needed to get out. I needed to leave. But as I turned to go, I heard it once more, louder now. "Daniel." I stopped dead in my tracks. My name, clear as day, as if it were coming from inside my own head. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls stretching and shifting, and that voice, it was everywhere. I didn't know what to do. I had to get out of there, but the more I tried to escape, the more I felt the house pulling me back in. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with each breath I took. The whispers, soft but persistent, echoed in my mind, urging me to move closer, to listen. I grabbed my coat and rushed out into the cold night, but even outside, the sensation didn't fade. The wind howled through the trees, but I swore I could still hear the voice, muffled but ever present, coming from somewhere behind the house. It was as if the house itself was calling me, dragging me back, and no matter how far I walked, I couldn't escape it. By the time I returned, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The sun had set, and the darkness seemed thicker than before. The house loomed over me, its windows dark, like hollow eyes watching my every move. I hadn't felt this way when I first arrived. I remembered the excitement, the hope of starting fresh in this new place. But now, all I could feel was dread. Inside, the house was just as I'd left it. Quiet. Still. But there was a palpable tension in the air, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I tried to sleep, but the whispers kept me awake, creeping through the walls, curling around my thoughts. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the house. It was the place itself. The walls, the floors, the air, it all felt tainted, like it had absorbed something dark, something sinister over the years. The next morning, I decided to do what any rational person would do. I called on a contractor to check the house. Maybe there was a structural issue. Maybe the walls were somehow vibrating, causing the sounds. I needed answers. I couldn't keep going on like this, not knowing if I was losing my mind or if something was truly out there. The contractor, a middle-aged man named Jim, arrived around noon. He was pleasant enough, smiling as he shook my hand and made small talk about the house. He'd worked on a lot of old homes, he told me, and assured me that nothing unusual would be found. But I wasn't so sure. As we walked through the house, I pointed out the places where I heard the whispers. He nodded politely but didn't seem too concerned. The old pipes, he said. The old wood. It all made noises, especially in the cold. We were in the hallway when he stopped suddenly, his face going pale. He put a hand to the wall, pressing it gently as if feeling for something. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the usual creaks and groans of the house. Then, faintly, almost imperceptible, there was a soft sound. A whisper. "Daniel." My breath caught in my throat. It was the same voice, the same whisper that had haunted me. I looked at Jim, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were wide, staring at the wall as if waiting for something. The whisper grew louder, more urgent. "Come closer." Jim took a step back, his face draining of color. I don't know what this is," he muttered. "This isn't right." I felt the panic rise in my chest. What was happening? This wasn't just a problem with the house. Something else was going on, something I couldn't explain. Jim excused himself quickly, mumbling something about needing to check the basement. I was left standing there, alone with the whispers, the walls vibrating softly as though the house itself was alive, trying to speak to me. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself that Jim was just as shaken as I was, but deep down, I knew it wasn't the house making those sounds. The house didn't whisper my name. That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder than ever, calling to me from the walls. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was something else, something I couldn't understand, but the urgency in the voice, it terrified me. I could feel it in the air. Something was coming. The next morning, I went down to the basement. I wasn't sure why, but something inside me told me I needed to see it. The house seemed to want me to go down there, to uncover whatever was hidden beneath its surface. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled of mildew. The stone walls were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the faint light from the overhead bulb barely illuminated the space. It was as if the basement had been forgotten, left alone for years. I moved deeper into the room, my footsteps echoing through the emptiness. And then, I found it. A small door, tucked away in the corner, barely noticeable. It was different from the rest of the basement. The wood was newer, less worn, as if it had been installed recently. There was a strange marking on the door, an old symbol, like a sigil. It didn't make sense. I reached for the handle, my heart racing. And just as I touched it, I heard the whisper again. "Daniel, come closer." The door creaked open slowly, as if inviting me in. I took a step forward, and then, without warning, the whisper became a scream, a high-pitched, terrifying sound that sent chills down my spine. The walls seemed to shake with it, the floor beneath me vibrating. I had to get out. But something stopped me. I stepped through the door, into the darkness beyond. The air was thick and cold, the scent of decay lingering in the air. There was something here, something ancient. I could feel it, like it was watching me. Waiting. And then, I saw it. A figure, shrouded in shadow, standing in the center of the room. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Daniel." It whispered again. This time, it wasn't the house. It wasn't the walls. It was something far worse. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as the figure in the darkness stared at me, its glowing eyes piercing the shadows. I couldn't move. The air felt heavier, as if the very space around me had become suffocating. The whisper had stopped, replaced by a deep, resonating silence that felt unnatural, like the world itself had held its breath. "Daniel." The voice, now clear and malevolent, echoed in my head. It was no longer the soft murmur from the walls, it was coming from within the darkness, from the figure itself. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, but my legs wouldn't respond. The figure shifted, its outline hazy, like smoke moving against the air. It didn't have a distinct shape, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. It was as if it existed only to torment me, to make me feel small, helpless. "Who are you?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling in the heavy silence. There was no answer. Just the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing on me. The temperature dropped suddenly, a sharp, biting cold that made my breath come out in invisible puffs. I could feel it, something ancient and malignant was here, in this basement, and it wasn't alone. There was a sense of wrongness, an overwhelming sense that everything about this place was cursed, twisted by something far beyond my understanding. The figure began to move, its shape shifting, the darkness around it swirling as though it were alive. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, my body locked in place as it inched closer. I could feel the presence of its eyes, though I couldn't see them clearly, only the faint, unnatural glow. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't make myself do either. The air was thick with an invisible force that paralyzed me. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice rasped, cold and hollow. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was something else. A warning. An accusation. Suddenly, I remembered the markings on the door, the sigil. I had seen it before, faintly, etched into the walls of the house, carved into the wood of the floorboards, hidden in places I hadn't noticed. It was all connected. This house, the whispers, the figure in the basement, it was all part of something older than I could comprehend. A force that had been lying dormant for years, waiting for someone to awaken it. A desperate thought flashed through my mind. I need to get out. I need to leave, now. But as if the house had read my mind, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I spun around, panic flooding my veins as I tried to find a way out. The figure was now standing in front of me, blocking the only escape. It moved with unnatural speed, its form still shifting, its outline never quite solid. You can't leave. You belong here now, Daniel, it hissed, its voice like the sound of nails scraping against metal. I tried to scream, but my throat tightened, and all that came out was a strangled gasp. I was trapped, cornered, suffocating under the weight of the presence that had consumed this house. The walls seemed to close in, the very foundations of the house groaning as if something deep inside was awakening, stretching out, reaching for me. I backed away, my eyes never leaving the figure. My heart raced, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refused to obey. Then, in an instant, it lunged at me. I barely had time to react. The figure was upon me, its cold hands grabbing me, pulling me closer. I felt a shock of icy dread as its touch burned through my clothes, seeping into my skin, reaching into my bones. It wasn't physical, it was something else, something that went deeper than flesh. The coldness spread through me, like a poison, seeping into my soul. I gasped for air, but the air around me was thin, suffocating. I was losing myself. I was losing control. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that filled the basement. Come closer, they urged, the walls vibrating with their intensity. The figure's voice joined them, merging with the others, creating an unholy chorus. But there was something else, a faint glimmer of light, a memory, something from the past, tugging at the edges of my mind. I fought to hold on to it, to focus on it. I have to get out. I have to fight. I closed my eyes, summoning every ounce of strength I had left, and willed myself to move. My body shook with the effort, but I pushed back against the figure, using every scrap of willpower to break free. The pressure on my chest lessened, just enough for me to gasp for air. I forced my legs to move, my arms to push against the figure's cold grip. With a sudden surge of strength, I broke free. I didn't look back. I ran. The darkness behind me seemed to reach out, trying to drag me back, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare. My feet pounded against the cold stone floor, and the whispers chased me, growing louder with every step. The door, the door! I reached the basement door and slammed my shoulder against it, my breath ragged, my heart in my throat. The door gave way with a violent crash, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath, trembling from head to toe. But I wasn't safe. The whispers had followed me. They echoed through the house, crawling along the walls, rising in volume until they consumed the entire space. I could hear them clearly now, like 1,000 voices calling my name, pulling me back, urging me to return. Daniel, come closer. I didn't know how long I could hold out, how much longer I could keep running from whatever was in that house. I didn't know if I was already too far gone, if the house had already marked me, claimed me as its own. But one thing was certain. It wasn't over. The whispers would never stop. I thought I had escaped. I thought the house, the figure in the basement, would be nothing more than a fading nightmare. But as I stepped outside, into the blinding daylight, the whispers didn't fade. They followed me, lingering just at the edge of my hearing, like a distant hum beneath the surface of the world. I couldn't escape them. No matter how far I ran, no matter how far I tried to distance myself from the house, they never stopped. The whispering was constant now, an ever-present force that clung to me, taunting me. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure. The glowing eyes, the endless shifting darkness, the coldness that had burned its way into my soul. I could feel it, like it was still with me, just beyond the veil of my awareness. Its presence was suffocating, a heavy weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I tried to leave town. I packed my things, left the house behind, but it was as though I had never left. Every street I turned down, every corner I passed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, until they became a steady, low murmur in the back of my mind. I began to question my sanity. Was it possible I had gone mad? Had the house driven me to the edge of reason? But no, there was something more, something that went beyond the limits of the mind. The whispers had started to change. At first, they were just calls, urges to come closer, to return to the house. But now, they were becoming something else. Darker. More insistent. Daniel. The voice was sharper now, more demanding. It had lost its soft, coaxing tone and was now filled with malice, like it was mocking me, toying with me. You can't run from us. You belong here. I couldn't ignore it. No matter how hard I tried, the voice followed me, like a shadow that never left. One night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, the whispers broke through the silence, louder than ever. I covered my ears, but it was no use. The voice, now unmistakable, was coming from everywhere. It was in the walls, the floor, the very air around me. It was as though it had followed me inside, made its home within me. Come back to the house, Daniel, it whispered, and this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many, all overlapping, all calling my name in unison. Come closer. We're waiting for you. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in, and I felt that coldness again, the same coldness that had overwhelmed me in the basement. I gripped the sides of the chair I was sitting in, trying to steady myself, but it was no use. The whispers were too much. I had to go back. There was no choice. The pull was irresistible, like a force greater than anything I could fight. It wasn't just the house anymore, it was the thing in the house, the thing that had spoken to me, the thing that had marked me. I knew I had to confront it. It was the only way to end it, to stop the whispers from consuming me completely. I packed a bag, my hands trembling as I stuffed a few essentials into it. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care that it felt like I was walking straight into the mouth of a nightmare. I had no choice. The drive back to the house was long, and every mile I got closer, the whispers grew louder. They were with me now, speaking to me with a certainty I couldn't escape. They filled the car, filled my mind, wrapped around my thoughts like a vice. By the time I reached the house, it was night again, the moon hanging low in the sky like a pale sentinel watching over me. The house stood before me, its silhouette dark against the starless sky, its windows like eyes, staring down at me. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking, and walked toward the front door. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, the whispering stopped. Everything went still, so still that it felt unnatural, like the world itself had paused, holding its breath. I pushed the door open. The house greeted me with its familiar, oppressive silence. But I could feel it, something was different. The air was thicker, the atmosphere heavier. The house had been waiting for me. I made my way inside, each step echoing in the dark emptiness. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and I could hear the distant sound of the house settling, but there was something more, something deeper. A presence in the shadows, watching me. I moved through the house, drawn toward the basement. I didn't want to go down there, but the pull was undeniable. The whispers had led me here. They were calling me. When I reached the basement door, I paused. My hand hovered above the handle, but I couldn't make myself open it. There was a part of me, deep inside, that screamed for me to turn around and leave. But the other part, the part that was marked by the house, couldn't move. I was already too far gone. I opened the door. The darkness in the basement was thick and suffocating, but I could feel it, the presence, the thing that had been waiting. It was here, in the shadows, in the coldness that filled the room. And then, from the darkness, a voice. Low, guttural, like something far older than the house itself. Welcome back, Daniel. I stepped forward, my legs unsteady. The room seemed to pulse with the sound of my heartbeat, each thought a reminder of how trapped I was, how far I had fallen into this nightmare. The walls seemed to close in again, as if the house itself was breathing, drawing me deeper into its depths. And then, I saw it. The figure, shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing faintly, standing in the center of the room. But it wasn't the same as before. It was bigger now, more defined, its form more solid, as if it had grown stronger since the last time I had seen it. The whispers swirled around me, a chorus of voices, all calling my name, all urging me to come closer. The air was thick with their presence, and I could feel them, surrounding me, suffocating me. I didn't know what to do. There was no escape now. The figure took a step toward me. And then another. Its voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command, a demand. Come closer, Daniel. You cannot run from us anymore. You belong here, with us. Forever. I didn't have the strength to resist anymore. I took a step forward, and the walls closed in around me. The moment my foot crossed the threshold of the basement, the world shifted. The darkness didn't just surround me, it swallowed me whole. I couldn't see anything now, couldn't even tell if I was still standing on solid ground. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing down on me from all directions. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt frozen, as if the very essence of my voice had been stolen. I couldn't breathe. And then, in the midst of the suffocating void, I felt it, a touch. Cold, like ice against my skin. It wasn't physical. It was deeper than that. It was a presence, a force brushing against me, making me feel smaller, weaker, as if everything that made me human was being drained away. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was feel the growing pressure around me, the weight of something ancient and malicious crawling into my mind, filling it with thoughts that weren't my own. They were his thoughts, the figure, whatever it was. They were whispers again, only now they were louder, invasive, gnawing at my sanity. You're mine now, Daniel. You always have been. We all have our roles to play. The words echoed in my skull, twisting my thoughts. I tried to push them out, tried to focus, but they wormed their way in, consuming everything else. I thought back to the first night in the house, the strange feeling when I first moved in, the coldness that had lingered like a shadow. It was there then, too, I realized. In the walls, the floorboards. Always watching, always waiting. I had been drawn to it, unknowingly, and now there was no escape. Suddenly, the coldness intensified. It was no longer just a sensation, it was a force, one that gripped me from all sides, pulling at my very core. The darkness seemed to pulse with life, as if the house itself was breathing, living, feeding off of me. I saw them then. Glowing eyes, just like the figure. But there were more now, countless eyes, all blinking in the pitch blackness, all staring at me. They weren't just in front of me. They were all around me, in the walls, in the floor, in the very air I breathed. Watching. Waiting. Come closer, the voice whispered again, only now, it wasn't just the figure. It was them, the many voices, all speaking as one. You are one of us now. You belong here. I felt myself falling into the void. I had lost control of my body, my mind. It was as if the house had taken root inside me, making me its vessel, its prisoner. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was alive, a living, breathing entity that thrived on my fear, on my confusion. It was in me. And then, the coldness reached a peak. The darkness no longer felt like an absence of light. It felt like a physical weight, crushing me from all sides. I couldn't see anything anymore. I couldn't even tell where the house ended and I began. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The figure was with me. Not just in front of me, not just in the shadows. It was inside me, too, filling every corner of my mind. Its cold presence seeped into my thoughts, into my soul, and I could feel myself slipping away. The man I had been, the one who had walked into this house just days ago, he was disappearing. Being replaced by something else. Something that belonged to the house. I didn't know if I was even human anymore. Then, as if the house had decided I was ready, the world shifted again. I was no longer in the basement. I was somewhere else. It was the house. But it wasn't the house I had known. It was different. The walls were made of dark stone, covered in ancient markings. The air was thick, oppressive. I could feel it. This was the true heart of the house, the place where everything had begun, where the whispers had originated. And standing before me was the figure, now fully formed, its eyes glowing like twin lanterns in the dark. Welcome home, Daniel, it said, its voice no longer a whisper, but a deep, resonating command that echoed through every fiber of my being. You were always meant to be here. I tried to move, to fight, but there was nothing left of me. The house had taken me, broken me down, made me part of it. My body no longer belonged to me. My thoughts were no longer my own. I could feel myself slipping. My memories began to fade, like water pouring through my fingers. The life I had lived before, the world I had known, it was all slipping away. All that remained was the house. And it was hungry. Now you are ours, Daniel, the figure said, stepping forward, its presence growing stronger, more defined. The house is you, and you are the house. Forever. I felt the pull again. The darkness. The coldness. The weight of the house settling deeper into my soul. And then, as the last fragments of my humanity were swallowed by the abyss, I understood. It was not just a house. It was a prison. A prison for souls, for people who had walked in and never left. A prison for the lost, for those who had been marked by the darkness. And now, I was one of them. Forever trapped. Forever a part of it. I was the house now. And as the walls closed in around me, I could hear the whispers once again. Daniel, come closer. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I was home. Have you ever wondered what's behind a door you're never allowed to open? A door that everyone seems to avoid, a door that has been locked for as long as you can remember? What if one day you find the key, and everything you thought you knew changes in an instant? I hadn't thought much about it at first. In fact, I hadn't thought about it at all until the day I found the key. It was just another typical morning in the office. The hum of fluorescent lights above me, the low murmur of my coworkers discussing the usual projects, deadlines, endless reports. But there was one part of the office that I always felt drawn to, a place that seemed different. It was the farthest room down the hall, a small door that never seemed to open. And it was always locked. At first, I thought it was just another supply closet. A place where they kept extra files or old equipment. But as the days turned into weeks, then months, I began to wonder why it was always closed. There were plenty of other doors in the office, but this one felt different. Every time I passed by it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden behind it, something I wasn't supposed to know. And then, one day, I saw something that made my heart race. It was a little brass key. Small, old-fashioned, with a faint rusted hue that told me it had been there for a while. It was lying on the floor next to my desk, as if someone had left it there on purpose. I didn't know why, but I picked it up. The key felt strangely warm in my hand, almost as if it had been waiting for me. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't just any key, it was the key to that door. The door I had passed by countless times without thinking. The door I had never dared to touch, let alone open. I stood up, feeling an unfamiliar sense of urgency. The whispers of curiosity filled my mind. What was behind that door? I walked down the hall, the key heavy in my pocket. As I neared the door, I could feel my pulse quicken. I stood there for a moment, staring at the handle, almost afraid to turn it. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I slid the key into the lock, and as the tumblers clicked into place, a shiver ran down my spine. The sound was deafening, like the creaking of old wood groaning under pressure. I turned the handle slowly, the door opening with a soft, almost reluctant sigh. The room beyond was dark, but there was a strange energy to it, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I stepped inside. At first, I couldn't make out much. The room was dim, filled with the scent of dust and old books. The faint glow of the office lights cast long, eerie shadows along the walls. There was nothing extraordinary about the room except for the sense that I wasn't supposed to be there. My eyes finally adjusted, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, there was a desk. It looked out of place, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Papers were scattered across it, some yellowed with age, others still crisp and new. On the wall next to the desk was a framed photograph, a picture of the office building taken from the outside. It looked normal at first, but there was something wrong about it. There was a figure standing in the window of the building, but it wasn't someone I recognized. The figure was shadowed, its features blurred as if it didn't belong there. I felt a sudden chill in the air, and I stepped closer to the desk. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls growing tighter with each passing second. There was an overwhelming sense of being watched. My hand hovered over the papers, unsure of whether I should touch anything. But the curiosity, the need to know, was stronger. I picked up a piece of paper, scanning the handwritten notes on it. They were scattered, nonsensical at first glance, but something about them made my skin prickle. Words like locked, hidden, and danger kept appearing in the text, and a sudden realization hit me. This wasn't just a room. It wasn't just a forgotten space in the building. It was something else entirely. something darker. I looked around again, my eyes searching the room for any sign of what I had stumbled upon. And then I saw it. In the farthest corner, behind the desk, there was a small door. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, as if drawn to it by some unseen force, I couldn't take my eyes off of it. The door was much smaller than the others in the building, almost like it had been built for something or someone else. And it was locked, just like the door I had opened. But this time, there was no key. No way to open it. My heart began to race, my mind spinning with questions. What was behind that door? What had I unlocked? The atmosphere in the room thickened, and a low hum filled the air. It was subtle at first, like the sound of something just beyond hearing. But then it grew louder. It wasn't just the hum of old wires or flickering lights. It was something deeper, something ancient. I turned to leave, but as I reached for the door I had just come through, something stopped me. The door was closing on its own. The sudden movement caught me off guard, and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one there. No one in the room with me. I grabbed the handle, but it was too late. The door was already shut, the faint sound of the lock clicking back into place as if it had never been opened. I was trapped. But it was worse than that. As I stood there, in the suffocating silence, I realized I wasn't alone. The hum was louder now, and it was coming from the small door. The one that had been locked. The one I hadn't opened. And it was calling to me. But what lay behind it wasn't something I could escape. I stood frozen, my hand still gripping the handle of the door I had just exited. The air around me seemed to grow thick, almost as if it had become a living thing, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me with its invisible weight. The hum from the locked door persisted, low and unsettling, vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked away, told myself that I had imagined it all. But I couldn't. Something was pulling me back, something far stronger than reason. My pulse quickened, a heavy knot forming in my stomach as I turned toward the small door in the corner. It hadn't been there when I first entered the room. I would have noticed it. I should have noticed it. But now, it was as if it had always been there, quietly waiting for me. I walked toward it. Each step felt like a betrayal of my own sanity, yet I couldn't stop myself. The room seemed to stretch longer with each passing moment, as if it didn't want me to reach the door, but my feet were already moving of their own accord. The hum was now louder, more insistent, like the low growl of a predator lurking just beneath the surface. I could almost hear a voice mixed in with it, a whispering call that seemed to say my name over and over again, urging me forward. Come closer, you're so close, you have to know. My hand trembled as it reached for the handle, the cold metal sending a jolt of fear up my arm. I paused for just a second, breathing shallowly, trying to convince myself that I was being irrational. That it was nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop now. I had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The key had unlocked the door to something I couldn't unsee. I turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, reluctantly, as if it, too, was unsure whether it wanted me to witness whatever lay beyond. The darkness that greeted me felt oppressive, swallowing any hint of light that had followed me into the room. I stepped inside. The air was even colder here. It felt wrong. The space behind the door wasn't like the rest of the office. It was larger, more cavernous, with walls that seemed to stretch on forever, closing in around me. The floor beneath my feet was uneven, like it had been hastily constructed or altered, as if the building itself had been reshaped to conceal what lay within. And then I saw them. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols and patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. They were words, not in any language I recognized, but they were familiar in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if they were calling to me, inviting me to understand them, to decode their meaning. I took a step forward, my breath hitching in my chest as I noticed the objects scattered around the room. At first, I thought they were old, discarded furniture, chairs, a table, some boxes piled in a corner. But as I approached, I realized they weren't just objects. They were old, yes, but they were also out of place. The chairs weren't just ordinary chairs. They were too worn, too misshapen. They looked like they had been used, sitting at strange angles, as though they were still occupied by someone or something. A table stood near the back wall, and on it lay a stack of papers, old and yellowed with age. But it wasn't the papers that caught my attention. It was the faint, almost imperceptible movement coming from beneath the table. I stopped, my heart hammering in my chest. The room felt colder, heavier. A low whisper echoed in my ears, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it was coming from beneath the table. I couldn't see anything, but the whisper was unmistakable, its words like the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. Leave now. I backed away, but something stopped me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the papers on the table. One sheet, in particular, caught my attention. It was much newer than the others, too clean, too pristine to belong in a place like this. My hand reached out, as if it had a mind of its own, and picked it up. It was a simple note, written in hurried, jagged handwriting. "Don't open the door." I froze. It didn't make sense. The note had been placed here, in this hidden room, in a place I had only just discovered. But who could have left it? And more importantly, why? The hum from the far corner of the room grew louder again, and I realized with a shock that the small door had closed behind me. I was trapped. I looked back at the table, and that's when I noticed it. Something had moved. One of the chairs was now facing me. I hadn't seen it shift, but I felt its presence. A shadow, deep and heavy, stretched out from beneath it, creeping slowly across the floor, inching toward me. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a pile of papers. They fluttered to the ground, scattering like leaves in a storm. The shadow grew, and as it did, the air in the room grew heavier, more oppressive. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I realized with a sickening certainty that they were no longer just voices. They were calling me. I was no longer alone in the room. Something had shifted. The room wasn't just cold. It was alive. And whatever was in here with me was closing in. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't open. My pulse quickened as I twisted the handle again and again, but it was useless. The door was locked. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it, the sound of movement. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, dragging across the floor. They were coming for me. And the whispers? They weren't whispers anymore. They were screams. Leave. Leave now. I had to get out. I had to get out now. But no matter how hard I pulled at the handle, the door wouldn't budge. And then I heard something else. Something that made the blood in my veins freeze. The sound of a key turning in the lock. Someone was coming. But it wasn't anyone I wanted to meet. I held my breath, my fingers still desperately twisting the door handle, but it was no use. The key had turned, but the door wouldn't open. Something on the other side, someone, was pushing back, holding it shut. A new wave of panic hit me, and my chest tightened. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat, my palms slick with sweat. The room seemed to constrict, the walls pressing in around me, their markings shifting, contorting as though they were watching me. I could almost hear them whispering in languages I couldn't understand, but the feeling was unmistakable. I didn't belong here. The footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate. Coming closer. I turned back to the small, shadowed door in the corner of the room, the one that had drawn me here in the first place. For a brief, irrational moment, I considered going to it, opening it. But as soon as I thought about it, the terror of the whispers became unbearable. I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to escape. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stopped. I froze, listening intently. The room was deathly silent, except for the faint hum of the lights above me. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear anything. But I felt them. Behind me, just out of sight, something was there. It was breathing, but it wasn't human. The air felt thick, and my mind screamed at me to look, to see what was coming. But I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Instead, I pressed my back against the door, as though I could will it to open. The wood felt cold and solid beneath my hands, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard it. A soft voice. Barely a whisper, but enough to send a chill down my spine. You shouldn't have opened it. I spun around, my eyes wide, but there was no one there. The shadows shifted in the corner of the room, but they were empty. Nothing moved. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then, the noise started. A scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor. Slowly, relentlessly. It came from beneath the table again. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Whatever it was alive, and it was coming closer. The air grew colder, and the darkness in the room seemed to deepen, stretching toward me like an endless abyss. I had to get out. I ran. I don't know why I didn't try to break the window or find another exit. Maybe I was too terrified to think clearly, or maybe I just knew, deep down, that I wouldn't make it in time. All I could think was to get out of the room, away from the hum, away from the shadows, away from the whispers. I ran to the farthest corner of the room, where the door was still locked, still firmly shut. I tried to push against it, but nothing happened. The door felt as though it were part of the walls themselves, part of the room, and it was holding me there. Trapped. But then I remembered something. The key. The key that had opened the first door, the one that had started all of this. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers shaking as I pulled it out. It was still warm to the touch, just like when I first found it. My heart raced as I shoved it into the keyhole, praying that it would work. I turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. The door didn't budge, and the hum of the room grew louder, pressing against my ears. And then, just as I was about to give up, I felt it. The smallest shift. A click. The door creaked open, and I rushed through it without a second thought. The hallway outside was eerily quiet. There was no hum, no whispers. Just the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind still reeling from what I had just experienced. But there was no time to process it, no time to think. I couldn't stay here any longer. I ran down the hall, my footsteps echoing off the walls, but as I passed the other offices, something caught my eye. The door at the end of the hall, the one I had just unlocked, was slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks. It shouldn't have been open. It couldn't have been. I had just locked it. But there it was, wide open. And beyond it, the darkness stretched out before me, endless and all-encompassing. The room I had just left. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. How had it opened? But before I could even take a step forward, I heard it again. The soft, unnerving whisper. You shouldn't have opened it. I turned, and this time, I saw it. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing just beyond the door. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. It wasn't human, not entirely. It moved toward me, slowly, deliberately, its form shifting as it approached. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt as if the air itself was holding me in place. The whisper came again, this time louder, more urgent. You shouldn't have opened it. But now that you have. The figure stepped closer, its presence growing stronger. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The room was silent again. The hallway, the office, everything felt empty, like nothing had happened at all. I stood there, my mind racing, my heart thudding in my chest. The door that I had opened, the one that had led to something, was now shut. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to return. I didn't want to go back. But somehow, I knew I would. I didn't want to go back. But even as I stood there, staring at the closed door, something inside me told me I had no choice. It was like a pull I couldn't explain, a magnetic force drawing me back to the darkness beyond that door, to the room I had just fled. I wanted to run. To leave the office, to leave this place behind. But my feet felt heavy, stuck in the hallway, as though something was holding me here. Something invisible. I took a step toward the door. The cold air from the room hit me like a slap to the face. I felt it even before I reached for the handle, the chill seeping through the walls, the floor, into my bones. It was as though the room was alive, waiting for me to return. And when I touched the doorknob, the tremor of electricity that ran through it sent a jolt of panic straight through me. I hesitated. I could still hear the whispers, faint and distorted, curling around my mind. They weren't just words anymore. They were feelings, pulling at me, urging me to step inside. Come, see. My breath hitched. I knew what I had to do. The door creaked open, and I stepped through. This time, everything was different. The darkness felt thicker, heavier than before. It felt as though the walls themselves were breathing, expanding and contracting with each exhale I took. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. It was so cold now, I could see my breath hanging in the air, misting before me like smoke. And the symbols on the walls, they were moving. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in the patterns, like the flicker of shadows in the corner of my vision. But then, they began to writhe. The markings twisted and turned on themselves, growing longer, shifting with an unnatural grace. It was as if they were alive, reaching out to me, calling to me, begging me to understand. I couldn't look away. The whispers were louder now, but they weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, clear and distinct, yet distorted. They seemed to speak to each other in an unfamiliar language, a language I couldn't place. The words weren't just foreign, they were wrong. I felt their presence growing around me, in the shadows, in the corners, in the very fabric of the room. I wasn't alone. Something shifted in the room, something massive, something ancient. The temperature dropped even further, and I could hear the distinct sound of something shifting in the dark. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. I could feel them watching me now. The footsteps began again. Slow. Methodical. As though someone, or something, was pacing in the dark, waiting for me to notice. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms were clammy with sweat. I had to move, had to find a way out, but my feet were frozen. I forced myself to take a step forward, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the room. Its shape was barely visible against the shadows, but I could see its outline, a tall, thin figure, hunched and distorted. Its eyes were what drew me in. They weren't eyes at all. They were holes. Empty, endless voids. And yet, they were watching me. Staring at me. It was as if the figure was not just seeing me, but knowing me, reading my every thought. I wanted to scream, to run, to turn and escape, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move, as though I were rooted to the spot. The figure took a step toward me. One slow, deliberate step. You shouldn't have come. The voice came from it, but it wasn't a voice. It was the room, the air, the very walls speaking, all at once, in a cacophony of noise. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and my thoughts scrambled. The world around me seemed to collapse into itself. The room stretched and distorted as the figure moved closer, its form becoming clearer, more defined. And then it was right there, so close I could almost feel it, its presence pressing on me. You shouldn't have opened the door. The voice came again, this time almost soft, almost kind, as if it were trying to comfort me. But there was nothing comforting about it. It was cold. Empty. I felt the weight of it on me, a crushing pressure in my chest, suffocating me. You're already too far gone. I gasped for air, but there was none to be found. The room had become a void, a place where air didn't exist, where light couldn't touch. The figure reached out, and I instinctively took a step back, my heart racing. But the room was too small now. It was closing in. The walls were pressing forward, and the darkness was swallowing everything. The figure's hand, skeletal, pale, and twisted, reached toward me, and I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot. I couldn't escape. You belong here now. The words sliced through the air like ice. And then, with one swift motion, the figure's hand touched my forehead. In that instant, everything went black. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. No sound. No light. No movement. Just a deep, endless void. But then, a noise. A whisper. And the voice, clear this time. You can't leave. I gasped for air, but it didn't come. I could feel the cold, the weight, the emptiness. I could feel the room shifting around me, its walls closing in, its darkness swallowing everything. And then, finally, I understood. I was never going to leave. I don't know how long I was in that void. Time felt irrelevant. Hours? Days? It didn't matter. All I could feel was the cold. The suffocating, crushing cold. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My mind was in a haze, as though I had been pulled into another reality entirely, a place where the laws of time and space no longer applied. But then, something began to shift. At first, it was a small flicker. A light that appeared in the distance, barely visible but growing. It felt like the first breath after drowning, a moment of relief that I clung to with desperate hope. I reached for it, my body feeling heavier with each movement, as if the weight of the void itself was holding me back. And then, the whispers came again. But they weren't distant now. They were close. Too close. In my ears, in my head, swirling in my thoughts. You can't escape. The voice was no longer cold. It was familiar now, almost human. You belong here. I recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was everywhere, and the light was fading, too weak to hold back the oppressive shadows that crept forward, inch by inch, like tendrils seeking to pull me deeper. And then, the figure returned. It emerged from the darkness, its shape solidifying as the void around it seemed to bend and warp. The eyes, those hollow, empty voids, locked onto me once more. I couldn't look away. It was as if it had a claim on me, as though it knew me, knew everything I had ever been or would ever be. It stepped closer, its presence suffocating. You can't leave. It repeated, its voice echoing in the darkness. You shouldn't have opened the door. I wanted to scream, to fight, but no sound came. My throat was dry, my chest tight. It was as if my body was no longer my own, my mind trapped in a place where nothing could escape. And then it spoke again, its voice softer now, almost tender. But it's not too late. I froze. What did that mean? Not too late? For what? The figure stretched out its hand, its fingers long and bony, pale like moonlight. It reached toward me, but instead of the coldness I had expected, the touch felt warm. Like the first rays of dawn after a long, bitter night. You can stay here. It whispered. You can become one with this place. You'll never have to feel alone again. Something in me snapped. This was it. The choice I had feared. The moment when I had to decide whether to fight or give in. My heart was racing in my chest, and everything inside me screamed to run, to resist, to not succumb to whatever this place was. But the warmth of the figure's hand, its presence, was undeniable. It was offering me comfort, safety in this suffocating darkness. The loneliness, the isolation, it had always been there, pulling me closer. And this place, it promised an end to it. But at what cost? I jerked back, my mind screaming, my body trembling. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be swallowed by this darkness, no matter how familiar it felt. And then, without thinking, I did the only thing I could. I ran. I ran through the darkness, not knowing where I was going, not caring. I didn't care about the whispers or the figure behind me, its voice echoing in the emptiness. I just needed to get away. But the room was changing. The walls were shifting again, closing in around me. The light I had seen earlier was now a distant memory, swallowed by the growing shadows. The more I ran, the more I realized that there was no escape. I was trapped. The door, the one I had opened, the one that had started all of this, appeared in front of me, but this time it was different. It wasn't the same door I had passed through. It was old, decrepit, covered in thick layers of dust and grime. And the key, my key, was gone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Panic gripped me. I looked back. The figure was there, standing in the center of the room, its eyes empty and cold. But it wasn't alone anymore. There were others now, rising from the shadows, their forms indistinct and hazy, like they were made of the very darkness itself. The whispers were deafening. "You shouldn't have opened the door." They all spoke in unison, their voices like a chorus, swirling together in a song of dread. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran, blindly, straight into the door, slamming my shoulder into it with all the force I could muster. The door creaked but didn't budge. I tried again and again, my fists pounding on the wood. But no matter how hard I hit it, it wouldn't open. "You can't leave." The voice echoed in my mind, and I froze. The words weren't just spoken, they were felt. A deep, gnawing truth that I couldn't escape. I couldn't leave. The darkness grew thicker, suffocating me. The walls closed in, the whispers rising in a crescendo, and the figures surrounded me. They were reaching for me, pulling me closer. And then, in the very last moment of clarity, I understood. The door had never been the way out. The door had always been the trap. And I had walked right into it. The office is quiet now, empty. The door, once locked, now swings open easily, as though it had never been closed. But no one ever comes to check. No one ever asks what happened. And perhaps no one ever will. But sometimes, when the lights flicker and the shadows seem to stretch a little longer than they should, the whispers begin again. And I know, it's never truly over. It's late. Too late, really. The store is empty, the aisles silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights above. I've been working the night shift for the past few months, and at this hour, the customers are few and far between. Mostly the same faces, tired, restless people grabbing last-minute items or those who have nowhere else to go. I don't mind it, though. The quiet gives me time to think, to be alone. I get lost in the monotony of stocking shelves and organizing the register. But tonight feels different. I can't shake this uneasy feeling that's been creeping up on me. Maybe it's because the clock's been ticking slower than usual. Maybe it's the strange coldness in the air that has settled in, despite the store's heat being on full blast. It's unsettling, to say the least. I keep looking at the clock. 5 minutes till closing time. I'm ready to go home, to collapse into bed and forget about the hours spent in this fluorescent-lit prison. The door chimes. It's almost as if the sound of the bell echoes longer than it should, reverberating through the empty store. I look up, and a man walks in. He's dressed in a long coat, the kind you wear in winter, even though it's nowhere near cold enough for it. His face is hidden under the shadow of his hood. I don't think much of it. People wander in at all hours. Sometimes it's people looking for something specific. Sometimes it's the random late-night wanderers. But something about this guy, something feels off. He's alone, and he moves toward the aisles with a strange, deliberate pace. As he walks deeper into the store, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I try to ignore it, focusing instead on the task of locking up. But there's something that I can't shake. This sense that I'm being watched. I push the thought aside. It's probably just fatigue playing tricks on me. The man turns a corner, out of my sight. The bell above the door chimes again, and I jump, startled. I hadn't heard the door open, and yet it sounds as though it's ringing louder than before. I glance toward the entrance, half expecting to see someone else walk in. But the store remains still. It's just him. For some reason, that unsettles me even more. I head toward the checkout counter, determined to finish my shift and go home. But as I approach, the man reappears in my peripheral vision, coming toward me, a basket in hand. He places it on the counter, and I glance at it. A few items, bread, milk, something else, nothing too unusual. But as he places the items down, I freeze. His eyes. They're too familiar. For a brief moment, I'm convinced I've seen him before. It's not just that he looks like someone I know, he is someone I know. But it's not possible. It can't be him. I blink and try to steady my breathing, but I can't shake the overwhelming sense of recognition. "Good evening," I say, my voice almost too quiet. He doesn't respond right away. Instead, he stares at me for a beat too long, his eyes searching. Then, he finally speaks, his voice low and measured. "Long night?" he asks, his words carrying a strange weight, as if he knows something I don't. I can't place it, but I feel like he's studying me, watching me in a way that feels almost invasive. I nod, trying to shake the growing feeling of discomfort. Just about to close up. My hand shakes as I begin to ring up his items. The soft click of the register sounds louder than usual in the quiet of the store. When I hand him his change, he reaches for it slowly, but it's not the movement that catches my attention, it's the way he looks at me. A flicker of recognition in his gaze. Like he's seeing something he's not supposed to. For a moment, I can't breathe. My pulse quickens, and my mind races. "Thank you," he says softly, almost too softly, as he takes the bag and walks toward the door. But as he turns to leave, he pauses. His back to me, he says, "I'll be seeing you again soon." I freeze. The door chimes again as he steps out, and I stand there, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind spinning. I don't know why, but something about what he said feels wrong. Almost like a warning. I don't know if I'll ever get used to the silence of the store after hours, but tonight, it's different. It feels oppressive. Like something is hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. I finish closing up and start to gather my things. But my mind keeps replaying that brief interaction with the man, those eyes that had looked at me, too familiar, yet too distant at the same time. As I walk out of the store and into the quiet streets, I can't shake the feeling that something has shifted. Something inside me. And deep down, I know I'll never forget his face. But it's not just his face that haunts me. It's what he said. "I'll be seeing you again soon." And I don't know why, but I'm terrified. I'm terrified because I know that whatever it is, it's not just a warning. It's a promise. The next day feels like a blur. I can't get the man's words out of my mind. "I'll be seeing you again soon." Every time I close my eyes, I hear those words echoing in my head, getting louder and louder. But I don't tell anyone. Who would believe me? After all, it was just a strange encounter with a late-night customer. People get strange ideas all the time. Still, the unease lingers. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. The whole day feels off. It's as if the world is slightly out of focus, like I'm walking through a dream. At work, I can't stop looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be there. But nothing happens. No one's suspicious. The hours drag on, each minute heavier than the last. By the time my shift comes around again, I'm exhausted, and the creeping paranoia is slowly starting to take over. That night, I sit at the counter, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in my stomach. I know I shouldn't feel like this. This is just another shift, just another night. But it's different. Everything feels different. The door chimes. I freeze, my heart skipping a beat. I don't even have to look up to know who it is. My body reacts before my mind can catch up. That cold, tight feeling in my chest, the one that's been following me all day, spreads like ice. The man steps into the store. I try to breathe normally, but it's hard. My mouth feels dry, my hands are shaking. It's him. I don't even need to see his face to know that it's him. My mind reels, the pieces clicking together faster than I can process. It's as if everything about him, every little detail, is etched into my memory. And yet, I can't understand why. I don't want to look up. I don't want to face him again. But I can't help myself. When I finally do, I almost wish I hadn't. It's him. But it's not. He's dressed the same long coat, the same hood, but his face, it's different now. Older. The lines in his face are sharper, more pronounced. His eyes, those eyes, look tired, hollow, like they've seen too much. And then it hits me. He's me. I can't breathe. The world tilts and spins around me, and I'm frozen to the spot, unable to move, unable to speak. I stare at him, my mouth dry, my legs shaky. He tilts his head, as if he's studying me, and there's something in his eyes, something familiar, but terrifying. I knew you'd be here, he says, his voice strangely calm. I didn't think you'd be this soon, but here you are. My heart pounds in my chest. You're me, I manage to say, my voice barely a whisper. It doesn't even sound like my own voice. The man, smiles faintly. It's a sad, knowing smile. The kind of smile that tells you something you wish you didn't know. Yes, he says softly. I am. And I've been waiting for you. For a long time. He steps closer to the counter, his gaze never leaving mine. You don't remember, do you? I take a step back, my legs unsteady, as if I'm walking in a dream. Remember what? The man, doesn't answer right away. Instead, he reaches into his coat pocket, pulling out something small, something metal. A key. He holds it up for me to see, the reflection of the store lights dancing off the cold, polished surface. It's a simple key, the kind you might use for a locker, but it looks old. Worn. This, he says, his voice low, is how it starts. The key to everything. My breath catches. The key. I don't understand, I stammer. What do you mean? What's happening? He steps closer, placing the key on the counter right in front of me. His hand brushes mine as he does, and a chill runs through me, deep into my bones. It's not supposed to happen like this, he says, his voice barely audible. But time doesn't always work the way it should. It bends, twists. And sometimes, you find yourself back where you started. I stare at the key. The metal seems to glint with something more than just reflection. Something wrong. Take it, he says softly. You have to. You don't have a choice. I don't know why, but I reach out, my hand trembling as I take the key. The moment my fingers touch it, something shifts. The world around me flickers, like a glitch in a video game, and suddenly, the store seems darker. The lights above hum louder, the shadows stretch longer. I pull my hand back, my heart racing, my thoughts scattered. The man, me, is staring at me again, his eyes filled with something unreadable. Now you've seen it. You've seen what comes next, he says, almost like a warning. What comes next? I whisper, my throat tight. Everything. Before I can react, he turns, walking toward the door. But as he reaches the threshold, he looks back over his shoulder, his face expressionless, yet his eyes hold a silent promise. I'll be seeing you again soon. And then, he disappears into the night, leaving me standing there, alone, holding the key. The key to what? And why does it feel like it's already too late to stop whatever's coming? The door slams shut behind him, and I'm left standing in the dead silence of the store. My hands are still shaking, still clutching the key. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the air conditioning, it all seems too loud now. Too real. I blink, trying to focus, trying to bring my thoughts together. But nothing makes sense. I don't understand what just happened. I don't understand who he was, who I was, and why he gave me this key. It's just a key. A simple, unassuming thing. But the weight of it feels heavy in my palm, like it carries the burden of something much bigger, something darker. I glance around the store. Everything seems the same. The shelves stocked with items, the soft fluorescent lights flickering above. But it feels different now. Every corner feels like it's watching me. Every shadow seems a little too deep, a little too thick. I look at the clock. It's already past 3 in the morning. I'm supposed to be closing up soon, but I can't focus. I can't shake this feeling of dread, of being watched. I put the key down on the counter and step away, my heart pounding in my chest. What should I do? Should I leave? Should I call someone? I reach for the phone but stop myself. I can't explain any of this. How could I? Who would believe me? That man, I had said things that didn't make any sense. He'd spoken like he knew what was coming, like he'd already lived it. My thoughts are interrupted by the sound of footsteps. I freeze. I look around. The store is empty. No one else is here. The footsteps stop, then start again, closer this time. Closer than they should be. Closer than anyone could be, unless... My breath catches in my throat. I turn, slowly, cautiously, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. The man, is standing at the door again. He didn't leave. He's back. But something's different this time. He looks the same, but his posture is stiffer, like he's been holding something back. His eyes, they're empty now, like there's nothing behind them. No warmth. No recognition. Just emptiness. You shouldn't have taken it, he says, his voice low, echoing in the quiet store. Now it's too late. I try to speak, but no words come out. My chest is tight, my throat constricted. I want to scream, but I can't. He steps forward, his foot falls heavy on the floor. Each step sounds like a drumbeat in my ears. You've made a choice, he continues, his voice cold and distant. And now, there's no turning back. I back away, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind is racing, spinning out of control. What choice? What did I do? He takes another step forward, and I'm frozen. I can't move, can't think, can't breathe. All I can do is watch him. Watch the version of myself that's standing before me and wonder what it all means. I told you, he says quietly, his eyes boring into mine. I've been waiting for you. I've always been waiting. And now you're here. A flicker of movement catches my eye. Something shifts in the shadows behind him. I turn, looking around the store, but I don't see anything. When I turn back, he's closer. Too close. I open my mouth to say something, anything, but all that comes out is a breathless whisper. Who are you? I'm you, he answers simply. And I'm you from a future you don't want to know. A future that starts right now. I want to ask him more, to demand answers, but the words catch in my throat. I feel like I'm suffocating. Like something's closing on me, something I can't see, but I can feel it. Don't worry, he says, as though he knows exactly what I'm thinking. You'll understand soon enough. We all have our role to play. His voice is unsettling, like a warning, but it's almost like he's trying to comfort me. Trying to prepare me for what's coming. I glance at the key on the counter again. It's still there, but now it looks different. It seems to shimmer in the low light, and I feel an overwhelming urge to pick it up again. To unlock whatever it is that's waiting behind the door. The door, the one I've always locked, the one I've never opened. What's behind it? What's behind that door? I ask, the words coming out before I can stop them. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out something else, something small, wrapped in cloth. I watch as he unwraps it slowly. It's a photograph. A photo of me. Of me, but not me. It's a version of myself that's older, darker. A face twisted by something terrible, something that's happened in the future. My heart skips a beat. Now, he says softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, you'll see what happens when you go through that door. And as he says it, the lights above flicker. The air grows colder, thicker. The store feels wrong. Everything feels wrong. Like I'm not just standing in the same place, but in a completely different world. And then he smiles. A cold, empty smile. You've already made your choice, he says, stepping back into the shadows. And now, there's no going back. And just like that, he's gone. Disappeared into the dark. Leaving me alone with the photograph, with the key, and with the realization that I've just crossed a line I can never uncross. The door is waiting. And so is whatever lies behind it. But I don't know if I'm ready to face it. And I don't know if I can. I stand there, frozen in place. The photograph sits on the counter before me, its image haunting me. My hand reaches out, but I hesitate. I'm not sure I want to see any more, not sure I can handle what's waiting for me. The version of myself in that photo, it's as if time has been bent, twisted into something grotesque. The eyes in that photo, my eyes, are hollow, empty. They look as though they've seen too much. Experienced too much. A shiver runs down my spine. I look at the door. I can't seem to tear my gaze away from it. The key is still there, lying innocently on the counter, almost mocking me. What did he mean? What choice did I make? Was it really a choice? I don't remember making any decisions. And yet, here I am. I pick up the key, feeling its weight in my palm again. The coldness of it bites through my skin. It's heavy now, heavier than before. It feels wrong, like it's a burden I can't carry. And I feel the need to open that door. To see what's behind it. To understand what it all means. But what if I don't come back? What if the future I saw in that photo is the one that waits for me behind the door? The store is eerily quiet now, the hum of the refrigerator and the flicker of the lights the only sounds that remain. The shadows seem to stretch further, thicker now, like they're closing in on me, pressing in. I look around, feeling the weight of the silence suffocating me. But the door, there's something calling me toward it. Something pulling me. I take a deep breath. I walk toward the door. Each step feels heavier than the last, like I'm dragging myself forward against my own will. I reach for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I touch it. The metal is cold, so cold. I grip it, and for a moment, I just stand there, my heart racing in my chest. The air feels thick with something I can't explain. The key. I feel it burning in my pocket, as if it knows what I'm about to do. My mind races, memories flooding back, flashes of conversations with customers, the sound of the bell ringing as they leave, the mundane details of my life. Everything feels so distant now. Everything feels like it's from another life. I turn the key. The lock clicks. The sound is too loud in the stillness, and the door creaks open slowly, almost reluctantly. I step inside. The room is dark at first, just like any other closet or storage room in the back of a store. But then, as I step further in, the air grows colder. A sharp, biting chill fills the space, like I've walked into a freezer. I can barely make out the outlines of the room. The walls are covered in peeling wallpaper, the floor dusty with old footprints. It smells musty, like something that hasn't been touched in years. But then, I hear it. A faint scratching sound coming from the far corner of the room. I freeze. The sound is soft at first, like something small, something insignificant. But it's there. Persistent. Scratching. Scratching against the wall. And then, I see it. A shadow. It's moving. I can't make out what it is, but it's there. And it's moving toward me. The scratching gets louder, sharper. It's not coming from the wall anymore. It's coming from something else. I want to turn and run. I want to leave, to lock the door and pretend I never opened it. But my legs won't move. I can't breathe. The fear is paralyzing, making my body feel heavy, my feet glued to the floor. I hear a voice. It's faint at first, a whisper, a soft murmur that I can barely make out. But it's there. I turn, trying to see where it's coming from, but the room is dark. Too dark. The whisper gets louder, and I realize it's calling my name. My breath catches in my throat. I feel the weight of the name in the air. John. It's my voice. But it's not my voice. This is the voice I heard earlier, the one that came from the future me. The one who warned me. The one who told me it was too late. The room shifts. The shadows in the corner grow larger. A figure steps out from the darkness, and my heart stops. It's me. But not me. This version of me looks wrong. His eyes are wide, unblinking, and there's a strange, almost unnatural stillness about him. He moves toward me slowly, the light flickering and casting long, distorted shadows as he steps closer. You shouldn't have come, he whispers. You weren't supposed to know. But now you're here. I want to run. I want to escape. But I can't. My feet feel stuck, like I'm sinking into the floor. The figure, me, steps closer, and I can see it now. The look in his eyes isn't just cold. It's empty. There's nothing behind them. Nothing human. You've crossed the line, he says. You've made the same choice. And now, there's no going back. The floor beneath me starts to shift. The shadows close in. The room warps, stretches, and then I feel it. The darkness. It's swallowing me whole. The walls close in, the air thickens, and the store feels like it's fading away, slipping through my fingers. I scream, but no sound escapes. There's no escape. No way out. And I realize, too late, that this was always meant to happen. I've been here before. And now, there's nothing left but the darkness. And him. The future me. And the door. The one I never should have opened. I don't know how long I've been standing there, trapped in the cold, suffocating darkness. Time has lost all meaning. The seconds stretch into infinity, each one heavier than the last. I can still hear my own breathing, shallow and panicked, but it feels distant, like it's coming from someone else. The figure, me, stands before me, unmoving. His eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, never blink. His lips curl into a twisted smile, but there's no warmth, no familiarity in it. There's nothing left but an overwhelming sense of wrongness. You shouldn't have come, he repeats, his voice low, as if savoring each word. You didn't listen. Now it's too late for you, just like it was for me. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I try to speak, to ask him, myself, what he means, but the words die in my throat. I'm frozen, unable to move, to think clearly. It's like something is blocking my mind, preventing me from processing what's happening. Do you see it now? He asks, taking a step closer. The choices we make, they shape everything. And you made the wrong choice. I feel my heart pounding in my chest. This can't be real. It can't be happening. I want to scream, but the sound doesn't come. I try to back away, but my legs won't move. I'm rooted to the spot, trapped in this nightmare, unable to escape. He reaches out a hand, cold and trembling, and I feel a chill run through me, deeper than the cold air in the room. The fingers graze my arm, and for a moment, I feel a connection, a bond, between us. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel as if he's pulling me into something darker, something I don't understand. Don't you get it? He murmurs, his breath cold against my ear. You are me. You always have been. And everything that's coming, everything that's already happened, has been a result of what we chose to do. I try to pull away, but I can't. His grip tightens around my wrist, and I feel my pulse quicken. The room around us starts to flicker, the walls distorting and bending, the shadows growing long and jagged. It's like the room itself is alive, twisting in response to his presence. I hear a sound, distant at first, then growing louder. It's the sound of footsteps, echoing in the emptiness. Slow, deliberate steps, like something, or someone, is coming toward us. But I don't see anyone. The figure smiles wider, a sinister gleam in his eyes. You think you can change it? You think you can stop what's already been set in motion? He laughs, a hollow, empty sound. You're just like me. You're caught in the same trap. And there's no way out. The footsteps grow louder, closer. I feel a tremor in the floor beneath me, as though something massive is approaching. Something terrible. And then, I see it. A shape, a shadow, emerging from the dark. It's not human. It's something else, something far more terrifying. Its form shifts and warps as though it's not entirely solid. It's like it's made of darkness itself, a mass of moving shadows, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. It stops in front of me. I can't look away. It's as if it has no face, no features, just a presence that fills the room. A void that consumes everything. The future me steps back, his face twisted in fear and recognition. "No," he whispers. "It's here. It's too late now." I don't understand what's happening. My mind is racing, thoughts colliding in a frenzy of confusion. What is this? What does it want? The shadow raises a hand, and I feel a pull, a force that tugs at my very soul. It's like it's trying to take me, to consume me, just like it has with everything else in this place. It feels like I'm being dragged into something else, something darker, deeper. I feel the pressure building, squeezing the air from my lungs. The shadow is pulling me closer, and I can't breathe, can't think. I'm drowning in it. I reach out, desperate for something to hold on to, and my fingers brush against the counter. The key. It's still there, lying on the surface, gleaming faintly in the dim light. I grab it. With every ounce of strength I have left, I twist the key in my hand, and in that moment, the world snaps. The shadow recoils, vanishing into the air as if it was never there. The pressure releases, and I'm left gasping for breath. The room around me is shifting, warping again, but this time I feel a sudden shift, as if something has broken free. The figure, me, is gone. And for the first time since I walked into this nightmare, I feel a sense of clarity. But it's not over. I know that now. I know that I'm not free. The key burns in my hand, a constant reminder of the choice I made, of the path I took, and the path that's still waiting for me. I turn and walk out of the room, the door slamming shut behind me with an unnatural finality. The store is quiet again, but it feels different. The air is thick, heavy with a weight I can't shake. The lights flicker above me, casting shadows that seem to move of their own accord. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I know this is just the beginning. The key is still in my hand, and I still don't know what the future holds. But one thing is certain. I can never go back. Have you ever looked through your phone, scrolled aimlessly, and stumbled upon something you don't remember doing? Something that doesn't belong? It happened to me last night. I wish I could say I didn't pay it any mind, that it was just some glitch, but it wasn't. It was much more than that. It started as a normal evening. I had just finished dinner, sat back on the couch, and opened my phone to check my social media and messages. My thumb brushed over the screen, tapping through apps, when I paused on my gallery. My photos were mostly mundane, pictures of the sky, some selfies, a few from when I went hiking last weekend. I remember every shot I took. Or at least, I thought I did. But there were 3 photos at the very end of the album that weren't mine. The first one was a blurry image of a street. The shot was taken at night, a dim, yellow street lamp casting long shadows along the pavement. There was no sign of any other people, just the empty street stretching into the distance. The photo itself had a strange quality to it, out of focus in some parts, but sharp in others. The more I looked at it, the more something about it unsettled me. It was wrong, as if it didn't belong in this world. The second photo was even stranger. It was of an alleyway, narrow and dark, the kind of place you wouldn't want to walk through alone. What struck me most was the figure in the background. I didn't notice it at first, but when I zoomed in, there was someone standing just at the edge of the alley, half hidden in shadow. I could barely make out their features, but their presence was undeniable. I could feel them watching me, even through the screen. My skin prickled. I checked the metadata of the photos, just to make sure I hadn't taken them by accident, but there was nothing unusual. No timestamps, no location data, just the images. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a mistake. Perhaps I had been sleepwalking, or maybe someone else had used my phone. But the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized that it was impossible. I was alone in my apartment the entire night. And then there was the third photo. This one was more disturbing than the others. It showed the same alley, but this time, the figure was much closer. They stood in full view, right in the center of the frame. Their face was hidden, obscured by something that looked like a hood, but it was the eyes, those eyes, that stopped me from breathing. There was something wrong with them, something unnatural. They were wide, too wide, and staring straight into the camera, as if they knew I was looking at them. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. How could this be? I hadn't taken any of these pictures. I hadn't even been to those places. I tried to convince myself it was all just a coincidence, a trick of the mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I sat there, staring at the photos for what felt like hours, my mind swirling with dread. The figure in the third photo, it was like they were moving in the frame, getting closer with each passing second. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I noticed something else. The background in the third photo wasn't static. It was shifting. A car's headlights blinked in the distance, casting a brief flare of light. The shadows stretched and moved in a way that didn't seem natural. It was like the whole scene was alive, changing, breathing. The figure didn't just stand there. It followed the light, the shadows, as if it were part of the landscape itself. I swiped to the next photo in the album, but there was nothing. The album was empty now. There were no more pictures. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Look behind you. I froze. The world around me seemed to go silent. I didn't dare turn around. My heart pounded in my chest. There was no way this could be happening. It couldn't. Yet, the message felt like it was real. It felt like it had weight, like it came from somewhere I didn't understand. I stayed perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the screen, my mind racing, trying to rationalize what was happening. But my phone buzzed again, this time with an image attachment. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. But the curiosity, no, the fear, was overwhelming. Slowly, I tapped on the message. The photo was of my living room. But it wasn't a photo I had taken. It was a shot of me, sitting exactly where I was, holding my phone. The angle was wrong, the lighting was off, but there I was. The figure from the alley, the one with the eyes, was now in my apartment, standing just out of sight in the corner of the room. It wasn't just a photo. It was a warning. Something was coming closer, getting nearer with every click of the camera. And the worst part was, I wasn't the one taking the photos. Someone, or something else was watching me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my fingers trembling, unable to make sense of what I was seeing. The text message that came with the photo was simple. You shouldn't have looked. But it was already too late. The figure was here. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. My mind raced, the thought of that figure standing somewhere just behind me sending shivers down my spine. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. Turn around. I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if it was there, right behind me, just like the photos suggested? I could hear the soft hum of my refrigerator in the corner of the room, the distant sound of traffic outside, but everything felt too quiet, too still. My apartment, which had always been a place of comfort, now felt like a cage. For a moment, I thought maybe I could just leave, run out into the street, and never look back. But where would I go? How could I escape something that was already inside my home, already so close? I had no answers, only fear. I held my breath and glanced at the phone screen again. Another photo had appeared. It was the same room, but this time, the figure was closer. A shadow in the corner, just on the edge of the frame, too close to ignore. My heart pounded. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was there. I could feel it. I'm right here. The message appeared alongside the photo. The words made my skin crawl, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. How could it know how I felt? How could it know where I was? I swallowed hard, trying to force myself to move. I couldn't stay still forever. Slowly, cautiously, I stood up from the couch, every step feeling like it was taking me closer to something I didn't understand. I kept my eyes on the phone, unwilling to look anywhere else. My hands shook uncontrollably as I typed a quick response. Who are you? For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, the phone buzzed again. Look now. I couldn't breathe. My eyes flitted between the screen and the darkened room. I told myself I was being irrational, that there was nothing there, that the photos were a trick, a glitch. But I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. That something was waiting, just beyond my sight. It was then that I heard it. A soft, creaking sound, like footsteps on the floor behind me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The noise was faint, but it was there, unmistakable. The sound of someone moving in the apartment with me. I turned quickly, my eyes searching the shadows, my breath coming in short gasps. But there was nothing. The room was empty, still, just as it had been when I first sat down. I dared to take a step forward, then another, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body too slow to obey. I approached the corner where the figure had been in the photo, my eyes darting over every inch of the room. No sign of anyone. But then, I saw it. In the reflection of the window, in the glass where I had never noticed anything before, a figure appeared. It was faint at first, just a blurry outline, but as I focused, it became clearer. A man, standing in the far corner of my living room, his eyes locked onto mine. His face was obscured, but I could see his posture, the way he tilted his head, almost as if he were studying me, waiting for something. The reflection wasn't just a reflection, it was a doorway to something else. A glimpse into another reality. A reality where he was already there, in my space, in my world. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The figure in the reflection remained still, unmoving. It was like he was waiting for me to do something. What? What did he want? My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. I've been watching you for a long time. I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I couldn't risk whatever this was reaching out to me. I turned and ran toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, something stopped me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that the door wasn't where it should have been. The frame was off, slightly tilted, like something had changed in the layout of my apartment. I tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. The lock was still engaged, but I could feel the presence behind me, could feel the figure approaching. I turned to face the reflection again, my eyes locked onto his. He hadn't moved, but his eyes were more intense now, almost glowing. The air around me felt thick, like I was suffocating, unable to escape. That's when I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, like a voice coming from far away, but also right next to me. You can't leave. You're already part of this now. The phone buzzed again, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I was too afraid of what might be there, too afraid of what it might say next. I felt my knees buckle, my vision swimming. The walls seemed to close in around me, my own apartment turning into a foreign place, a place I no longer recognized. I wasn't sure how much time passed. My thoughts were clouded, the world spinning around me. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until they filled the room, each one like a jagged knife in my mind. Look at the next photo. I couldn't resist. I knew I had to see it, even though I was terrified. I grabbed my phone, trembling as I opened the latest message. It was a photo of me. But it wasn't the me I knew. The man in the picture was wearing my clothes, standing in my apartment with the same blank stare as the figure. Only this time, I saw it clearly. I saw my own face, empty, hollow, as though I had already become something else. And then, just as my mind reached its breaking point, the figure in the reflection smiled. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the coffee table as the image on my phone burned itself into my mind. The smile on my reflection, the reflection of someone who was unmistakably me, sent a jolt of terror through my veins. It wasn't a smile of recognition, nor a grin of familiarity. It was an expression of something darker, a twisted mockery of my own face. A version of myself that had been hollowed out, as if whatever had taken shape in this other world was consuming me. I blinked, and the image shifted, like it was playing out in real time. I could see my reflection move in the window, but now it wasn't standing still anymore. It was walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately, its head tilted as it approached. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, suffocated by the weight of what was happening. It was too much to comprehend. How could I be looking at myself, but not myself? The whispers around me grew louder, their clarity unsettling. They weren't just voices now. They were words, sentences, demands. You're not supposed to be here. I tried to force myself to act, to move, to think, but the horror locked me in place. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It wasn't just a reflection anymore, it was a presence. Something trying to reach through. The door behind me rattled again, as if confirming my worst fear. It was trying to get in. The phone buzzed again, louder this time. A new photo. I almost didn't want to look, but I had no choice. My thumb trembled as I unlocked the screen. The latest image was worse. It was an image of the hallway outside my apartment door, taken from the inside, through the narrow crack of the door that separated me from whatever lay beyond. And there, at the edge of the frame, standing just outside, was a figure, shrouded in darkness, barely discernible. I didn't need to see its face to know what it was. The reflection in the window seemed to smile wider. The figure in the photo and the reflection were one and the same, slowly converging, growing closer and closer. My mind screamed in terror, but my body was frozen in place. The air around me was growing heavier, denser, suffocating me. The oppressive weight of fear pressed in on all sides. And then, the reflection's hand moved. It reached out toward me. Through the glass, through the invisible barrier separating me from this thing. I could feel its fingers inches away from me. My breath caught in my throat, my heart racing. I turned away from the window, but I knew it was already too late. The apartment door rattled again. This time, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't a passing sound. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. I didn't know what to do. The reflection behind me was moving closer, and the figure in the photo was too, its presence closing in with each passing second. I needed to get out. I had to leave. I grabbed the door handle, desperate to break free. But the door wouldn't open. The lock had been turned from the outside. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I turned, hearing the soft rustling of fabric behind me, but when I looked, there was nothing there. The reflection was gone, and so was the figure in the window. Only an empty, oppressive silence filled the room. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the apartment. The walls, once familiar, now felt alien, hostile. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and every shadow seemed to stretch longer, darker. I looked at the phone in my hand, another message. You can't escape me. You're already in my world. My stomach twisted, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. My pulse hammered in my ears as I raised my hand to respond. But before I could type, the phone buzzed again. Turn around. I didn't want to. I couldn't bring myself to do it. But it wasn't just the phone telling me now. I could feel it. The presence, tangible and suffocating, was there. Behind me. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. Slowly, almost against my will, I turned. The figure stood before me. It was me. But it wasn't. The version of myself standing there was older, more worn, as if time had passed differently in this other world. Its eyes were hollow, dark, like empty voids, yet they bore into me with an intensity that felt unnatural. It smiled again. The same twisted smile from the reflection. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, constricted. The figure, myself, took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It reached out a hand. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest, but the air was thick, as if I was moving through water. The figure's hand got closer. Closer. I felt its fingers brush against my skin. The touch was cold. Too cold. My body shuddered violently, but it wouldn't let go. I tried to pull away, but its grip was firm, as if it were holding me in place. Let go! I gasped, barely able to speak. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it leaned in closer, its cold breath tickling my ear. You belong to me now. And then the world around me went black. The darkness was suffocating, overwhelming, like it was trying to swallow me whole. I tried to move, but it felt as though the air itself had turned to lead. My limbs were heavy, like I was trapped in a dream where every movement felt sluggish and forced. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I gasped, sucking in air like I hadn't breathed in forever. I wasn't sure if I was waking up or still trapped in some nightmarish illusion, but the familiar hum of my phone broke through the darkness, like a tiny thread of reality. My hand moved to grab it without thought, instinct guiding me. The screen flickered to life, and I saw a new message. You can't escape. Not now. Not ever. I shuddered. That same oppressive weight was still on my chest, still suffocating me. My eyes darted around the dark room, desperate to catch a glimpse of anything familiar. I was still in my apartment, but the room had changed. The walls were closing in, the air thick and damp, like I was underwater. I stood up shakily, the floor cold against my bare feet. There were no windows now. No light. Only darkness and the sound of my rapid breath in my ears. Every creak of the floorboard sent a shock of panic through me, and I swore I could hear distant whispers, like voices carried on the wind, though there was no wind. The phone buzzed again, the vibrations rattling through my fingers. Another message. Look behind you. I didn't need to be told again. I felt it. That presence. It was there, just beyond my vision, creeping up behind me, its breath cold against my neck. But when I whipped around, nothing was there. Only the oppressive silence and the unbearable darkness. I turned back to the phone, my hands trembling as I typed. I had to know what was happening. I had to understand. What do you want from me? The reply came instantly, as if it had been waiting for me to ask. I am you. Or, at least, I was. A version of you that never left. The words hit me like a slap in the face. A version of me? Was this some twisted game? Some nightmare I couldn't escape? Before I could react, the phone buzzed again. A photo. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The screen lit up, showing a picture of me, sleeping, maybe curled up on the couch in my apartment. I wasn't alone in the photo, though. There was a shadow standing just behind me. Tall, impossibly tall, with a face hidden in the darkness. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was watching me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I backed away from the phone, dropping it onto the floor as if it were burning. But the whispers grew louder. The darkness around me seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, pressing in from all sides. I could hear footsteps now, faint at first, but they were growing louder, closer. I wasn't alone. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with dread. I tried to move, to run, but the room seemed to stretch, to change. The walls shifted, bending, growing tighter around me. And with each passing moment, those footsteps grew closer. I had to get out. I had to escape. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed toward the door, desperate to get out of this suffocating nightmare. My hand gripped the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked from the outside, just like last time. The footsteps were almost behind me now. I could feel the presence, feel the breath on the back of my neck. The phone buzzed once more. You can't escape. You are me now. I screamed, pulling at the door with all my might, but it wouldn't give. The darkness was closing in on me, and I felt the figure behind me, its cold hand pressing against my back. The sensation was enough to freeze me in place. You are already mine. The words were spoken softly, but they echoed in my mind, louder than anything I had ever heard. I turned around, not knowing what to expect. But when I looked, the figure was right in front of me. It was me. Or a version of me. Twisted. Hollow. Its eyes were empty pits, and its mouth stretched wide, impossibly wide, in a grin that didn't belong on my face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My chest was tight, like I was suffocating all over again. The figure reached out, its cold, bony hand brushing against my face. Its touch sent a wave of ice through my body. My reflection. My future. It was all around me. And then, the door, it clicked. It opened. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I bolted, rushing through the door and into the hallway. But the darkness followed me, pressing against me like a living thing, suffocating every step I took. I didn't know where I was running, but I had to get away. I had to escape. And then I heard it. The whisper that had been with me all along. You can never escape. You belong to me now. And for the first time, I realized, no matter how far I ran, no matter how fast I tried to escape, it was always going to be there. I was already lost. I ran. I didn't know where I was going or what was chasing me, but I knew I couldn't stop. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, urging me forward. The hallways around me twisted and shifted, disorienting me, making it feel like the very building was alive, bending and folding, trapping me in its suffocating grip. Every corner I turned felt familiar, yet wrong. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their surfaces stretching and contracting, like they were breathing. The air was thick with the scent of stale, musty darkness, and the silence pressed down on me like a weight, broken only by the sound of my frantic footsteps and my own labored breathing. I glanced down at my phone, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it. The screen flickered to life, but this time there were no new messages. No new pictures. The photo of me, the one I had seen earlier, was still there, sitting at the top of the screen, frozen in time. I swiped it away, desperate for any distraction, but it only came back, right in front of my face, staring at me like a grotesque reminder of what had happened. You can't escape. The words glowed on the screen, taunting me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and kept running, my mind spinning, my pulse racing. But I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't outrun the feeling that something was following me, just out of sight, but always there, watching. Waiting. I turned another corner, and then I saw it. The door. It stood at the end of the hallway, an ordinary wooden door, but it looked different somehow, more real, more solid, like it was the only thing in this twisted place that still had some semblance of normalcy. I had to reach it. I had to get out. I stumbled toward it, my hands reaching for the handle, but when I touched it, a shock of cold ran through my fingers. I yanked my hand back, heart thudding in my chest. The door was locked. I stepped back, panic rising in my throat. There had to be a way out. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not with that thing still out there. I turned to run again, but the hallway stretched out endlessly, like it had no end. My footsteps echoed in the silence, louder and louder, as if mocking me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out with trembling hands. The screen lit up, and I froze. Turn around. The words were simple, but the dread that washed over me was anything but. Slowly, my body refused to obey my mind. I wanted to keep running, but my legs wouldn't move. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to face it. But somehow, I knew I had no choice. I slowly twisted my head, my body stiff with fear. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure. Tall, slender, and completely still, like a shadow that didn't belong in the light. The thing was just standing there, watching me. Its eyes, empty black voids, stared right into mine, sending a chill down my spine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by its gaze. And then I saw it, the smile. It wasn't like any smile I'd ever seen. It stretched too wide, too unnaturally, like it was pulling its face apart. Its mouth opened wider and wider, revealing teeth that looked like sharp, jagged blades gleaming in the dim light. The thing began to move. It moved slowly at first, its long limbs bending at impossible angles, each step a jerky motion, like it wasn't sure how to walk. It was coming toward me, its black eyes never leaving mine, its smile never faltering. I tried to scream, but the sound was trapped in my throat. It was getting closer. And then, just as it reached me, I felt a strange sensation, like the floor beneath my feet was slipping away. I felt weightless, like I was being pulled into the darkness, into the void. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, for whatever fate awaited me. But then, nothing. The coldness, the fear, the presence, it all stopped. I opened my eyes, but the hallway was gone. The door was gone. The thing was gone. I was standing in the middle of a completely different place, an empty space, so vast that it swallowed everything around me. There were no walls, no ceilings, just a void stretching out in every direction. I wasn't sure if I was still alive, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't alone. A voice echoed in the vast emptiness. "Welcome home." And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't running from it. I was running to it. And now, there was no escape. Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so real, that when you wake up, you can't tell if you're still dreaming? I woke up this morning with that feeling. The kind that settles deep in your chest, that nagging uncertainty that whispers in your ear, "Are you really awake?" I stretched, the familiar weight of my blankets comforting me, the softness of the pillow beneath my head. The sunlight peeked through the cracks in the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. It was a perfect morning, the kind that felt like everything was right in the world. But there was something wrong, something I couldn't put my finger on. I lay still for a moment, letting the quiet of the room wash over me. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a low, constant presence that I had never noticed before. I stood up, my feet meeting the cold floor, and that's when I noticed it. The clock on the wall read 10:30, but I didn't remember hearing the alarm, didn't remember waking up at all. I rubbed my eyes and shook my head, trying to dispel the odd feeling that had settled in my gut. "It's just a bad night's sleep," I told myself. Nothing more. But then, as I walked towards the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And I froze. My reflection didn't look quite right. My hair was messy, yes, but there was something in my eyes, something I couldn't explain. It was as if my reflection wasn't me anymore, but someone else. Someone different. I leaned closer, my breath fogging up the glass, and I couldn't look away. And then, it was gone. My reflection was normal again, just like it should be. But the feeling of unease didn't leave. Shaking my head again, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the last remnants of that strange sensation. But as I dried my face, I saw something else in the corner of my vision. A shadow darting across the room. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the empty, quiet space of my bathroom. I frowned. I'm just imagining things, I thought, but my heart was racing now. The air around me felt thick, almost oppressive, like the world itself was pressing down on me. I stepped back into my bedroom, hoping the fresh air from the open window would clear my mind. But when I looked out the window, something caught my eye. The street below, normally so peaceful, with the soft hum of morning activity, was completely still. No cars. No people. No movement at all. Just an empty, silent street. As if the world outside had been frozen in time. I turned away from the window, my hands trembling slightly. Maybe I was still asleep. Maybe this was just a continuation of the dream. But as I moved to make my bed, I felt a strange shift in the air, a sudden weight that I couldn't explain. The silence, once so comforting, now felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That something, someone, was out there, just beyond my reach. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space before me. Something's wrong, I thought again. But this time, it wasn't just a thought. It was a certainty. I took a deep breath and moved toward the door, my hand reaching for the handle. But as my fingers brushed the cold metal, something caught my attention. A faint noise. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent a chill down my spine. It came from the other side of the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone else in the house? Was I really awake? I turned the knob slowly, my mind racing, and opened the door. There was no one there. But the hallway beyond was different. The walls seemed to warp and stretch in a way that made no sense. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally across the floor. I stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me. It was as if the ground wasn't quite solid, like I was walking through something that didn't belong in the real world. The whisper came again, this time clearer. You're not awake. Not yet. The words echoed in my mind, sending a shiver through me. I blinked, trying to clear the fog that clouded my thoughts, but the world around me was shifting. The shadows lengthened, the air grew colder, and the room seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. I took a step back, my hand gripping the doorframe, and as I did, I felt something brush against my skin. Cold. Unseen. A chill ran through my body, and I quickly slammed the door shut. But as the sound of the door clicking into place echoed in the room, I realized something terrible. The world hadn't changed. I had. And I wasn't sure anymore if I was waking up, or if I was still trapped in a dream. The room was silent again, but it didn't feel right. The hum of the refrigerator had vanished, and now there was nothing. Not even the usual distant sounds from the street. I stood in the middle of my room, my back pressed against the door, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was standing just beyond the other side, watching me. My breath came in shallow, quick bursts, and my heart pounded louder than ever. I glanced around, but everything appeared normal, too normal. The same clothes scattered across the floor, the same stack of unread books on my desk, the same messy bed. The light streaming in from the window was warm, comforting even, but it didn't feel real anymore. The longer I stood there, the more I doubted what I knew. Was this really my room? Was I truly awake? I turned slowly, my feet carrying me across the floor with an almost mechanical precision. My legs felt like they were moving of their own accord, the muscles stiff and uncooperative. I reached the window again, my hand trembling as I pulled the curtains back. The street outside was still empty, but now the buildings looked wrong. The shapes seemed to ripple, like a distorted reflection in a cracked mirror. A sudden, sharp sound broke through the eerie quiet, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. They were coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping in my chest. The hallway, once dark and still, now appeared to stretch out endlessly, the walls bending inwards as if closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I took a step back, but the air was thick, almost suffocating. The hallway felt like a place where time didn't exist, where space warped and twisted around me. The shadows clung to the corners, making it impossible to see clearly. But I felt them, those cold, invisible eyes. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The footsteps came closer, and I braced myself, my eyes darting toward the door. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. Maybe I'm still dreaming. But as the footsteps grew louder, I knew it wasn't a trick. This was real. And whatever was behind that door was very real too. The door creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway. At first, I couldn't make out any details. The figure was cloaked in darkness, a shadow that seemed to consume the light around it. But then the figure stepped forward, and I saw him clearly. It was me, but not quite. His face was older, the features worn and tired, like someone who had lived far longer than I had. His eyes, my eyes, were wide and filled with something I couldn't name. Fear? Desperation? No. It was something worse. Something darker. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words that came out weren't what I expected. "You've been here before," he said, his voice a hollow echo of my own. My mouth went dry. "What?" I whispered, stepping back. He raised a hand, the motion slow, deliberate. His fingers trembled slightly, and for a moment I thought he might reach for me. But instead, his hand dropped and his gaze turned cold. "It's already begun," he said. The room around me seemed to pulse, the walls shifting like liquid. The air thickened, pressing against me, making it hard to breathe. I looked at the figure standing in the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The figure's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not the one who wants something," he said. "You're the one who's been trying to wake up." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. It felt like a truth I couldn't grasp, something just out of reach. "What does that mean?" I whispered. He stepped forward again, closing the gap between us. His presence was suffocating, like he was the air I was trying to breathe. "It means," he said softly, his voice low and urgent, "you've never woken up." "Not really." Before I could respond, he vanished. Just disappeared into thin air, leaving me standing alone in the darkening room. I stood there, my chest heaving with panic, unable to move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wasn't awake. I wasn't really awake. I was still dreaming. The walls around me began to blur again, the edges of the room dissolving into a void. I stumbled backward, reaching for something, anything, stable, but there was nothing. This isn't real. This can't be real. But the world around me kept shifting, and the whispering voice of the figure echoed in my ears, growing louder, clearer. "You're still dreaming." My heart sank. If this was all a dream, then how could I escape it? How could I wake up? Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. My body weightless, spinning in the void, I could feel the air rushing past me, but there was nothing to hold onto, no way to stop the fall. And then, before I could even process it, I felt the ground beneath me again. I hit the floor hard, gasping for air, but when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was in the same room, my room, but it was different. The walls were cracked, the floor covered in dust and debris. The light flickered above me, casting strange shadows across the space. And at the center of the room stood the figure. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There were more of them. More versions of me. Each one older, more worn down than the last. It never ends, they all said in unison, their voices merging into one. And I realized with a sickening certainty that this, whatever this was my fate. I would never escape. The room swirled in front of me, the air growing thick and oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The versions of me, scattered across the room, moved closer, their faces hollow, their eyes vacant but filled with something else, something unsettling. A reflection of what I would become. I backed away, my breath shallow, feeling the weight of their eyes pressing into me. Each step I took seemed to echo unnervingly loud in the silence, as if the room was absorbing every sound, every movement. The light above flickered again, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor, distorting the shapes of the figures. The more I looked at them, the more I realized they weren't just versions of me. They were echoes. Pieces of me, trapped in a cycle. "You're still here," one of them spoke. His voice was raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. I looked at him, my own face twisted in despair. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice cracking. Another version of me stepped forward, his movements stiff, unnatural. "In the loop," he answered, his tone flat. "It's all you'll ever know." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't breathe. "No," I whispered, backing further into the corner of the room, desperate to escape. "This can't be real. I just need to wake up." But even as I said the words, I knew it wouldn't work. The room remained the same, the figures watching me with cold, calculating eyes. There was no escape. The silence returned, broken only by the soft sound of the flickering light. And then, from somewhere beyond the shadows, a voice echoed, too familiar. "You're trying to wake up again." I froze. The voice, my voice, sounded distorted, like it was coming from everywhere at once. The room shifted again, the edges blurring, twisting. I stumbled forward, trying to find my balance, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it was made of shifting sand. The air thickened around me, and I could feel the weight of someone bearing down on me. I reached out, my hand brushing against the cold, cracked wall, trying to steady myself. But as my fingers made contact, the surface rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. The world around me began to bend, the walls stretching and distorting, and in the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. I turned sharply, my heart racing. There, at the far end of the room, stood a door. A door that wasn't there before. A door I hadn't noticed. It was a doorway to something else, something beyond. I could feel it, a presence waiting for me. Something I couldn't explain, but knew I had to face. I took a step toward it, my legs trembling, each movement feeling like I was wading through molasses. As I neared the door, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was resisting my approach. But I pushed through, reaching out and grasping the handle. It was cold, too cold. My fingers went numb as I twisted the knob and opened the door. What lay beyond wasn't another room. It wasn't another space. It was a reflection of the same room I'd been trapped in, only it was empty. completely empty. The walls were smooth, flawless, and the floor gleamed as though it had never been touched. No cracks. No dust. No versions of me. Just a cold, barren space. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. And then I heard it. A sound, far off but unmistakable. The soft echo of footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. It's him. It's me. I whirled around, but there was no one there. I ran back to the door, my hands frantic as I yanked on the handle. But it wouldn't open. The door was stuck, the knob refusing to turn. I pounded on it with my fists, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Again. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned back to face the empty room. But now it wasn't empty anymore. There, standing in the center of the space, was another version of me. This one was different, though. He looked older. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. But what truly unsettled me was the expression he wore. There was no fear in his eyes. No confusion. Just a quiet, knowing acceptance. "You've been here before," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I could barely breathe. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat a painful reminder that this was no longer a dream. This was my reality now. And there was no waking up from it. "You never left," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "You'll never leave. Not until you understand." A cold, tingling sensation spread across my skin. Understand what? I forced myself to ask. His lips twisted into a faint smile, one that mirrored my own. "That you've always been here. This is the only place you'll ever be." My vision blurred, and I stumbled back, falling to my knees. The room around me distorted again, the walls stretching, the floor sinking beneath me. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating me. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was not alone. Not anymore. The figure stepped forward. "It's not a dream," he said, his voice low and cold. "You're still asleep." And with that, everything went black. I woke up, or at least, I thought I did. My body was heavy, weighted down by a force I couldn't understand. The air was thick, cloying, and the dim light creeping through the curtains did nothing to alleviate the feeling that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. It felt wrong. The room was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls, once familiar, now looked alien. The furniture, the shadows, everything had an unsettling quality to it. Like it was all off. Slightly distorted, as though it had been altered by some invisible hand. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breath. Was this really real? I'd been here before, hadn't I? I glanced toward the door, expecting to see it, the door that had appeared in the strange, empty room before. But it was gone. The space in front of me was just a plain wall, no hint of any doorway. Suddenly, the familiar sound of my phone vibrating on the bedside table snapped me back to attention. I reached for it, my hands trembling. The screen lit up with a text message, just one line of text. "Wake up." I froze. The words were simple, but they hit me like a jolt of electricity. A chill crawled up my spine as I stared at the message. I didn't recognize the number. I couldn't recall ever giving it to anyone. I quickly unlocked my phone to check if there were any other messages, any signs of who had sent it. But the screen only displayed one new notification, the same cryptic message staring back at me. Wake up. I gripped the phone tightly, my pulse racing. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I couldn't trust anything, certainly not this. The moment I looked up from the phone, I heard it. A faint, distant sound, as though something was scraping across the floor. I held my breath, straining to listen. It wasn't just the usual creaks of the building settling. No, this was different. This was deliberate. I rose to my feet, moving cautiously toward the sound. My legs felt weak, unsteady beneath me. I took a few tentative steps toward the hallway, my mind racing. It was too quiet now, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I stopped at the door and hesitated, pressing my ear against it. The scraping noise had stopped, but now I heard something else, footsteps, slow and measured, echoing from somewhere beyond the walls. I opened the door cautiously, my eyes scanning the hallway. It was dark, almost suffocating in its stillness. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, twisted shadows along the floor. Is anyone there? I called out into the silence. My voice sounded small, weak in the emptiness. No response. No sound, save for the distant echo of my own voice. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight of each footfall. The walls closed in around me, pressing in tighter with every step. I had no idea where I was going, no sense of direction. I just kept walking, drawn forward by the persistent feeling that something was waiting for me. Then, at the far end of the hallway, I saw it. A door. I had no memory of this door. It hadn't been there before, but now it stood in front of me, towering and dark. The handle was cold to the touch, and my heart raced as I reached for it. I hesitated, just for a moment. A feeling of dread washed over me, more intense than anything I'd felt before. But then I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing in the middle of the room, facing away from me. I couldn't see their face, but there was something about the silhouette that made my blood run cold. It felt familiar. Too familiar. You've been looking for me, the figure said, their voice low, as though it was coming from deep within the room. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that voice. It was my own. I stepped into the room, feeling the air grow colder around me, thick with an unexplainable weight. The figure slowly turned to face me, and I finally saw him, my reflection. But not quite. His face was gaunt, hollowed out, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. His lips were twisted into a smile that wasn't quite right. It was stretched, wrong, like it had been forced onto his face. It's all the same, he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine. No matter how many times you wake up, you'll always find me here. I stumbled backward, panic flooding through me. What are you? I gasped, my voice trembling. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward me, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he was savoring every moment. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I could think was that I had to get away. I had to escape. I could feel the weight of his presence following me, every step like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I burst into another room, desperate to find something, anything, that could give me answers, but there was nothing. The walls closed in around me, and the world continued to blur, the edges of reality fraying. And then, just like before, I heard it. the scraping sound. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. The door I had entered from slammed shut behind me. And I was trapped again. The figure's voice echoed in the room, softer now but no less chilling. You're not dreaming, you're not awake. You're stuck. I froze, the words reverberating through my mind like a drumbeat, each echo deepening the pit of dread in my stomach. You're stuck. The walls around me seemed to close in, their edges shifting and warping as though they, too, were unsure of what they should be. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous, pressing against me with each breath. The room, this nightmare of a room, felt more like a prison than a place of refuge. I turned around in a frantic circle, my hands shaking, desperate to find some kind of exit. But there were no windows, no doors, just the same distorted walls. I pressed my palms flat against the cold surface, my fingers searching for a crack, something to break the illusion, to escape this endless nightmare. But the walls remained solid, unyielding. You can't leave, came the voice again, closer this time. I spun around, heart thudding in my chest, but the figure remained a few steps away. He, or was it I, stood there, watching me with that same twisted smile. What do you want from me? I gasped, my throat tightening. I couldn't breathe. The air had become thick and suffocating, making each inhale feel like an impossible task. I want you to understand, the figure replied, his voice calm, too calm. This is your reality now. You will never wake up. You will never escape. I took a step back, panic clawing at my insides. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a dream, right? I had to be dreaming. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I had woken up before, hadn't I? No, the figure interrupted, his voice sharp, like a blade slicing through my thoughts. You never woke up. You're trapped in your own mind. I staggered back, my mind reeling. No, this isn't real. It can't be. He tilted his head, that twisted smile never leaving his face. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? You'll never know the difference between what's real and what's not. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me as I struggled to hold onto something, anything, that felt real. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but the moment I opened them again, the world had changed. The walls had cracked, like shattered glass, and through the fissures, I could see something else. A different space. A different reality. Shadows moved across the cracks, like figures in the distance, reaching for me. The room, if it could still be called a room, seemed to breathe, the air heavy with an unnatural tension. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, as if the very fabric of reality was pulling me in, trapping me. There's no escape, you see? The figure was closer now, standing just a few feet away, his breath cold on my face. You can run all you want, but you'll always be here. Always. The more I looked at him, the more my own reflection distorted. His eyes, my eyes, shifted, changing from tired, sunken pits to something deeper, something more otherworldly. The smile stretched wider, unnaturally wide, and I could almost feel my own face mirroring it involuntarily. My chest tightened with fear, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I closed my eyes, desperate to escape the sight of that grotesque smile, that haunting, all-knowing gaze. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. I was trapped. I was trapped, and I couldn't wake up. You wanted answers, he whispered, his voice like a dark lullaby. Now you know. It's all a game. The dream, the waking, the in-between. None of it matters anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, willing myself to wake up. To escape. But the more I tried, the less I felt like I existed. It was as if I was being erased, my very being fading into the shadows, swallowed by the nothingness. And then, the sound, the scraping sound, came again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right next to me, behind me, in front of me, all around me. The sound of something moving, something alive, just out of my reach. I turned, terrified of what I might find. But there was nothing there, nothing but the shadows, the dark, endless stretch of emptiness. And yet, the scraping continued, closer now, louder, as though something was coming for me. I ran, my legs moving without thinking, without feeling, my body acting on pure instinct. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get away. But the deeper I ran, the darker the world became. The shadows closed in, swallowing the light, and the scraping sound grew louder, more insistent. It was everywhere. I was running through nothingness, just the oppressive weight of fear pressing down on me, my every breath a struggle against the crushing weight of this dream. What was real? I screamed inside my mind. What was happening to me? Suddenly, I stopped. The darkness was suffocating, and for the first time, I realized there was no escape. The world had collapsed around me, and there was no way out. The scraping stopped. And then I heard a whisper. Wake up. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I had. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.